Gandalf never stops moving. That is the first thing you need to understand about Gandalf. The thing that defines him. The thing that separates him from every other powerful being in Middle-earth. Gandalf never stops. Gandalf walks. Gandalf rides. Gandalf crosses mountain ranges and river valleys and the vast, empty stretches of Eriador that lie between the last outposts of civilization. Gandalf has been walking across Middle-earth for 2,000 years, and in all that time, in all those centuries, all those leagues, all those long roads under sun and moon and stars, Gandalf has never settled, never rested, never stayed long enough to call any place home. Elrond has Rivendell. Galadriel has Lothlorien. Saruman has Isengard. Even Sauron has Mordor. Every great power in Middle-earth has a place, a seat, a stronghold, a fixed point on the map from which their influence radiates outward. Gandalf has nothing. Gandalf has a staff, a hat, a pipe, and an endless road stretching from horizon to horizon. Gandalf's home is the road itself, the road and the people he finds along it. The kings and the farmers and the hobbits and the dwarves and the rangers and the elves, whose lives he touches briefly, brightly, before the road carries him onward. Tonight I want to trace that road, every step of it. From the moment Gandalf first set foot on the shores of Middle-earth to the moment he set foot on a ship bound for the west, I want to follow Gandalf's journey, the complete, unbroken, 2,000-year journey of the most important traveller in the history of Tolkien's world. Because when you trace Gandalf's path on a map, when you lay out the full scope of where Gandalf went and what he did and who he talked to and what he learned, you begin to see something remarkable. You begin to see that Gandalf's journey is not random. Gandalf's travels are not the aimless wanderings of an old man who likes walking. Gandalf's travels are a mission, a 2,000-year strategic campaign, waged not with armies and fortresses, but with friendships, with conversations, with the patient, stubborn, endlessly optimistic cultivation of alliances and relationships and networks of trust, that will, when the darkness finally comes, make the difference between victory and annihilation. Stay with me. This one covers 2,000 years and about 10,000 miles. Part 1. Before Middle-earth. Gandalf does not begin as Gandalf. Gandalf begins as Olrin, a Maya, one of the angelic spirits who served the Valar in the blessed realm of Valinor before the making of the world. Olrin is not the strongest of the Maya. Olrin is not the most powerful, the most impressive, the most feared. Olrin is described as the wisest. And the description comes with a qualification that is crucial to understanding everything that follows. Olrin is wise because Olrin has learned pity. Olrin has learned compassion. Olrin, among all the Maya, is the one who understands suffering, not in the abstract, not as a philosophical concept, but in the immediate, personal, empathetic way of a being who feels the pain of others as his own. Olrin serves Manwë and Varda, the king and queen of the Valar. Olrin also learns from Nienna, the Valar of grief, the weeper, the being whose domain is mourning, and whose wisdom is the wisdom of loss. Nienna teaches Olrin patience and hope, teaches him that grief is not the end, that suffering has meaning, that the world's wounds can be healed if someone is willing to endure the slow, painful, frustrating work of healing. This education matters. This education shapes everything that Gandalf will become, shapes his methods, his temperament, his approach to the long struggle against Sauron. Gandalf does not fight evil with overwhelming force. Gandalf does not crush the darkness with superior power. Gandalf fights evil with patience, with encouragement, with the stubborn refusal to give up on people, even people who seem hopeless, even situations that seem lost, even allies who have failed and causes that appear doomed. Olrin walks among the elves of Valinor, unseen. The unfinished tales tell us that Olrin moved among the elves in a form they could not perceive, walked invisibly through their communities, planted thoughts of hope and courage in their minds, nurtured their resistance to despair without ever revealing himself. This is Gandalf's method from the very beginning, the method of the invisible helper, the unseen counselor, the friend who strengthens you without you knowing he is there. Part 2. The Sending. Around the year 1000 of the Third Age, the Valar become aware that the Shadow is returning to Middle-earth. Sauron, the defeated lieutenant of Morgoth, has not been destroyed. Sauron has been hiding, recovering, rebuilding, gathering his strength in the dark places of the world where the Valar's sight does not easily reach. The Valar decide to send help, not armies, not the overwhelming military intervention that ended the First Age with the War of Wrath. The Valar have learned that overwhelming force causes overwhelming damage. The War of Wrath destroyed Beleriand, sank an entire continent beneath the sea. The Valar will not risk that again. Instead, the Valar send emissaries, 5 Maiar, clothed in the bodies of old men, limited in power, forbidden from matching Sauron's force with force, or from dominating the wills of the peoples they are sent to help. These are the Istari, the wizards, and their mission is specific. They are to advise, to counsel, to inspire, to strengthen the resolve of the free peoples against Sauron's returning shadow. They are not to conquer, they are not to rule, they are not to build kingdoms or raise armies or impose their will on Middle-earth. They are to help. Nothing more. The restrictions are severe. The Istari are Maiar, beings of immense spiritual power, beings who participated in the creation of the world, beings whose full strength could reshape the landscape of Middle-earth. But the Valar bind the Istari's power. The Valar wrap them in mortal bodies, limit their abilities, constrain their authority. The Istari are sent to Middle-earth not as liberators but as counselors, not as generals but as advisors, not as kings but as servants. The logic of the restriction is the logic of the entire mission. The Valar learned from the War of Wrath that overwhelming force causes overwhelming damage, that saving a world by destroying it is not saving at all. The Valar learned that the peoples of Middle-earth must save themselves, must find their own courage, their own resilience, their own strength. The Istari are sent to help the free peoples do this, not to do it for them. The distinction is crucial. The distinction defines everything that Gandalf will become. Olrin does not volunteer. This is important. This detail from the unfinished tales reveals something essential about Gandalf's character. When the Valar are choosing who to send, Olrin says that he is too weak for the task and that he fears Sauron. Man responds that this is exactly why Olrin should go, that the fear is a reason for the mission, not an excuse to refuse it. The moment is foundational. Gandalf's entire 2,000-year journey in Middle-earth begins with a confession of inadequacy, begins with the honest, humble, entirely sincere admission that he is afraid, that he does not feel strong enough, that the task is too great and the enemy too powerful and the odds too long. Gandalf goes anyway. Part 3. The Grey Havens. Gandalf arrives at the Grey Havens Mythland, the harbour on the Gulf of Lune, the last great elven port in Middle-earth. He arrives by ship, from the west, across the sea that separates the mortal world from the Blessed Realm. The Grey Havens is where everything begins. The Grey Havens is where Gandalf first touches the soil of Middle-earth, first breathes the air of the mortal world, first feels the weight of the body that the Valar have given him. The body of an old man, grey-haired, bent, leaning on a staff. The body is a limitation. The body is a disguise. The body contains a fraction of Olrin's true power, wrapped in flesh and bone and the physical frailty of the aged. Imagine the disorientation. Olrin has existed as a spirit, a free, bodiless, ageless being of immense perception and awareness. Now Olrin is old. Now Olrin is cold, is tired, is hungry. Now Olrin has joints that ache and feet that blister, and a back that bends under the weight of a staff. The body is the Valar's restriction, the physical form that prevents the Istari from dominating Middle-earth, that forces them to work through counsel and friendship rather than through the overwhelming exercise of Maiar power. Gandalf must experience Middle-earth as the mortals experience it, must walk its roads on aching feet, must endure its winters in a grey cloak, must feel the cold and the hunger and the exhaustion that the peoples he has sent to help feel every day of their lives. The restriction is the point. The restriction forces empathy. The restriction forces Gandalf to understand the people he is helping, not in the distant, theoretical way that a spirit understands the created world, but in the intimate, physical, inescapable way of a being who shares the same cold, the same rain, the same weariness of the road. Gandalf's body is not a costume. Gandalf's body is a teacher. Codon the shipwright is waiting. Codon, the oldest of the elves in Middle-earth, the silver-bearded mariner who has been building ships at the Grey Havens since the First Age. Codon looks at Gandalf and sees something that no one else sees. Codon sees through the disguise. Codon recognizes the spirit beneath the wrinkled skin and the grey cloak, and Codon does something extraordinary. Codon gives Gandalf Narya, the Ring of Fire, one of the 3 elven rings. The gift is a secret. Narya is given in secret, and Gandalf wears it in secret for the next 2,000 years. Only Círdan and Gandalf know. The Ring of Fire, the ring whose power is to kindle courage in the hearts of others, to rekindle hope where hope has faded, to inspire resistance against the shadow and the cold and the despair that Sauron's presence brings. The gift tells us what Círdan sees. Círdan, who has watched Middle-earth for thousands of years, who has seen the rise and fall of kingdoms, who has sent the ships of the dying into the west. Círdan looks at Gandalf and decides, this is the one. This is the one who will need the Ring of Fire. This is the one who will need to kindle hope. This is the one whose mission will require the specific power that Narya provides. The power to light fires in cold hearts, to warm despair into courage, to turn the dying embers of resistance into flames. Gandalf takes the ring. Gandalf puts on the body of an old man. And Gandalf starts walking. Part 4. The first steps. The first centuries of Gandalf's time in Middle-earth are the least documented, and in many ways the most important. From approximately to 1000 to 2000, Gandalf wanders. Gandalf walks the roads of Middle-earth, learning the land, learning the peoples, learning the vast, complex, fragmented, political landscape of a world that has been shaped by thousands of years of war and migration and loss. Middle-earth in the year 1000 of the Third Age is not the Middle-earth that most fans picture. The great kingdoms of the Nadain are intact, Arna in the north, Gondor in the south, both still powerful, both still ruled by the descendants of Elendil. The elven realms of Rivendell and Lothlorien still flourish. The dwarves still hold Moria. Khazad Diem, the greatest of the dwarf kingdoms, is still inhabited, still productive, still the beating heart of dwarven civilization. The world is larger and more alive than the diminished twilight Middle-earth that the Lord of the Rings describes. The roads are better, the inns are open, the kingdoms are functional. There are garrisons at Amon Slell, ships in the harbours of Pelagia, trade caravans moving between the dwarf cities and the markets of Gondor. This is the world that Gandalf enters, a world that is battered but functional, a world that has survived the wars of the Second Age, that has rebuilt itself around the kingdoms and the alliances that emerged from Sauron's first defeat. The shadow is growing, but the shadow has not yet broken the structures that hold the free peoples together. Gandalf uses this time to build his network. Gandalf travels everywhere, visits the elves, visits the Dunedain, visits the scattered settlements of men in the north and the south. Gandalf learns languages. Gandalf learns customs. Gandalf learns the specific, local, ground-level details of who lives where, who trusts whom, who has grudges, who has alliances, who can be relied upon and who cannot. Gandalf learns the geography. This is the foundation of everything, the intimate, foot-level, mile-by-mile knowledge of how the land fits together. Gandalf learns which passes over the misty mountains are open in winter. Gandalf learns which fords of the Brandywine are passable in spring flood. Gandalf learns the hidden paths through Mirkwood, the shepherd's trails through the hills of Emyn Muil, the goat tracks across the White Mountains that connect Gondor's valleys without crossing the main roads. Gandalf's knowledge of the landscape will save lives. Gandalf's knowledge of the landscape will guide armies. Gandalf's knowledge of the landscape will, at the critical moments of the War of the Ring, provide the information that turns defeat into victory. This is Gandalf's method. Not magic, not the deployment of Maiar power, not the exercise of spiritual authority. Gandalf's method is friendship. Gandalf makes friends. Gandalf shows up, shares a pipe, tells a story, listens to complaints, offers advice, shares news from distant places, lights a firework or two. Gandalf makes himself useful, makes himself welcome, makes himself the kind of guest that people are glad to see arrive and sorry to see leave. The friendships are strategic. Gandalf knows this. Gandalf is not merely a kind old man who likes making friends. Gandalf is building a continent-spanning network of relationships that will, when the time comes, provide the foundation for the resistance against Sauron. Every friendship is a node in the network. Every conversation is a thread in the web. Every meal shared and pipe smoked and tale told is an investment in the future. An investment that will pay dividends centuries later, when the darkness falls and the free peoples need each other and need someone who can bring them together. Part 5. The 5 Wizards. Gandalf is not alone. There are 5 Istari, 5 wizards sent to Middle-earth by the Valar, and understanding what happens to the other 4 is essential to understanding why Gandalf's journey matters. Saruman the White is the head of the Order. Saruman arrives first, or at least Saruman is given authority over the others. Saruman is described as the greatest of the 5, the most learned, the most powerful. Saruman's specialty is law. Saruman studies the arts of the enemy, studies the rings of power, studies the mechanisms of domination and control that Sauron uses. Saruman's knowledge is vast, and his pride is greater. Radagast the Brown settles in Rhosgobel, at the edge of Mirkwood. Radagast loves the animals and the plants of Middle-earth, loves the birds and the beasts, loves the growing things, loves the natural world with a passion that eventually draws him away from his mission. Radagast does not fail in the way that Saruman fails. Radagast does not fall to evil, does not betray the Order. But Radagast drifts. Radagast becomes so absorbed in the world's natural beauty that he loses sight of the purpose that brought him to Middle-earth. The 2 blue wizards, Alatar and Palando, go east. They pass beyond the borders of the lands that the Lord of the Rings describes, into the vast, unmapped territories of eastern Middle-earth, where Sauron's influence is strongest, and where the free peoples, have the least support. The blue wizards vanish from the story. Tolkien was uncertain about their fate, speculated at various times that they might have founded cults, might have fallen to corruption, might have succeeded in weakening Sauron's hold on the eastern peoples. The uncertainty is the point. The blue wizards enter the darkness and do not return. Gandalf is the only wizard who fulfills his mission. This is not an accident. This is not because Gandalf is the most powerful or the most talented or the most strategically brilliant. Gandalf fulfills his mission because Gandalf does the one thing that the mission requires, and that the other wizards, for various reasons, fail to do. Gandalf stays connected to the people he was sent to help. Saruman retreats to Isengard and becomes a scholar. Radagast retreats to Rosgobel and becomes a naturalist. The blue wizards retreat into the east and become whatever they become. All four wizards withdraw. All four wizards stop walking, stop traveling, stop maintaining the vast network of relationships that the mission requires. Gandalf keeps walking. Gandalf keeps showing up. Gandalf keeps knocking on doors and sharing meals and listening to problems and offering help. Gandalf, alone among the five, maintains the web of friendships that the Valar's mission demands. Part 6. The growing shadow. The shadow grows slowly. For the first 1,000 years of Gandalf's time in Middle-earth, the shadow is a rumour, a whisper, a vague unease that the wisest can feel, but that the common people cannot name. Around to 1050, the shadow settles on Greenwood the Great, the vast forest that stretches across the upper reaches of Middle-earth, east of the Misty Mountains. The forest darkens. The trees sicken. The paths grow dangerous. The elves of the woodland realm retreat northward, pulling back from the forest's southern reaches as something old, something powerful, something that radiates corruption the way a fire radiates heat, establishes itself in the forest's depths. The forest is renamed. Greenwood the Great becomes Mirkwood, the dark forest, the dangerous forest, the forest that travelers fear and that even the elves avoid. The renaming is a measure of the change. Greenwood was a name of beauty, a name that spoke of the forest's vitality, its health, its place in the ecology of Middle-earth as one of the great woodlands. Mirkwood is a name of fear, a name that warns travelers away, that marks the forest as corrupted, that announces to the world that something has gone wrong in the heart of one of Middle-earth's oldest living landscapes. Gandalf watches. Gandalf does not yet know what the shadow in Mirkwood is. The shadow could be many things, could be a surviving Balrog, could be a Nazgul, could be some other remnant of Morgoth's ancient evil that has crept back into the world. Gandalf watches and waits and continues his travels, filing the information away, adding it to the vast mental map of Middle-earth's dangers and opportunities that he is building with every step. Meanwhile, the world is deteriorating on multiple fronts. In the north, the kingdom of Arna is fragmenting. The great Nadain kingdom that once ruled all of Eriador has split into 3 lesser kingdoms, Arthedain, Cardolan and Rudor, and the 3 are quarrelling, weakening, losing the unity that made Arna strong. To the east, the Witch King of Angmar is building his power, the chief of the Nazgul, establishing a kingdom of his own in the cold mountains north of Rivendell, preparing a war that will eventually destroy all 3 successor kingdoms and leave the north a wasteland. The wars of Angmar are a disaster that unfolds over centuries. Rudor falls first, corrupted from within, its royal line replaced by agents of the Witch King. Cardolan falls next, overwhelmed by the armies of Angmar, its people scattered, its barrows haunted by the wights that the Witch King sends to corrupt the burial places of the dead. Arthedain holds longest, holds through centuries of pressure, through sieges and battles, and the slow, grinding attrition of a kingdom that is fighting for its life against an enemy that never tires. Gandalf cannot prevent this. Gandalf is one being, an old man with a staff, walking the roads, talking to people. Gandalf cannot stop the fragmentation of kingdoms, or the rise of Angmar, or the slow decay of the Nadain. Gandalf can only watch, and counsel where counsel is welcome, and try to maintain the connections between peoples who are drifting apart. Part 7. Dol Guldur. Around Tar 2063, Gandalf does something that will define the next 900 years of his life. Gandalf goes to Dol Guldur. Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery, is the fortress that has grown in southern Mirkwood, the source of the shadow that has been darkening the forest for 1,000 years. The fortress is occupied by a being that the elves call the Necromancer, a being of great power, whose identity is unknown, whose nature is uncertain, whose presence in Mirkwood is a mystery that the wise have debated for centuries. Gandalf enters Dol Guldur alone. This is not a military expedition. This is not a coordinated assault by the White Council. This is a single wizard walking into the fortress of an unknown enemy, armed with nothing but his staff and his wits and the burning need to know what the shadow in Mirkwood actually is. The courage required for this reconnaissance is extraordinary and characteristic. Gandalf walks into dark places. Gandalf has been walking into dark places since the beginning of his mission, and the reconnaissance of Dol Guldur is the most dangerous walk he has taken yet. Gandalf penetrates the fortress's defenses, explores its corridors, investigates the nature of the power that dwells there. And the necromancer, whoever the necromancer is, flees, the shadow withdraws. The darkness recedes. The fortress is temporarily abandoned, and Mirkwood enjoys a period of relative peace that the elves call the Watchful Peace. The Watchful Peace lasts almost 400 years, from Tar 2063 to Tar 2460. 4 centuries of relative calm, during which the shadow in Mirkwood diminishes and the free peoples of the north enjoy a respite from the creeping darkness. 4 centuries during which Gandalf continues to walk, continues to build his network, continues to maintain the web of relationships that the mission requires. The Watchful Peace is not idle time. The Watchful Peace is preparation time. Time during which Gandalf strengthens the alliances that will be needed when the shadow returns. Because the shadow does return. In Tar 2460, the necromancer returns to Dol Guldur. The fortress is reoccupied. The darkness resettles on Mirkwood. The Watchful Peace is over. But Gandalf is not satisfied. Gandalf suspects, fears, that the necromancer is not merely a powerful sorcerer or a rogue spirit. Gandalf suspects that the necromancer is Sauron himself, that the Dark Lord, defeated at the end of the Second Age, stripped of his ring, cast down from his throne, has been slowly, patiently, methodically rebuilding his power in the depths of Mirkwood. The suspicion is not shared. Saruman, the head of the Order, dismisses Gandalf's concerns. Saruman assures the White Council, the Council of the Wise, which includes Gandalf, Saruman, Elrond, Galadriel, and other lords of the elves, that Sauron cannot have returned, that the necromancer is some lesser evil, that the Watchful Peace proves that the threat has been dealt with. Gandalf disagrees. Gandalf continues to worry. And Gandalf continues to walk, continues to travel the roads of Middle-earth, watching for signs of the shadow's return, preparing for a confrontation that he fears is inevitable. Part 8. The Hobbits. This is where Gandalf makes the most important strategic decision of his entire 2,000-year career. A decision that no other wizard, no elf lord, no king of men would have made. Gandalf becomes interested in hobbits. Hobbits, the smallest, the least significant, the most overlooked people in Middle-earth. A race of small, peaceful, comfort-loving farmers who live in a quiet corner of Eriador, who have no army, no king, no political influence, no role in the great events of the world. Hobbits, who are beneath the notice of every other powerful being in Middle-earth, beneath the notice of Sauron, beneath the notice of the elves, beneath the notice of the kings of men, beneath the notice of Gandalf's fellow wizards. Gandalf notices them. Gandalf visits the Shire. Gandalf walks among the hobbits, smokes their pipe weed, attends their parties, watches their fireworks, listens to their gossip. Gandalf sees in the hobbits something that no one else sees, something that will prove more valuable than all the armies and fortresses and magic rings in Middle-earth. Gandalf sees resilience. Gandalf sees a people whose smallness is their strength, whose lack of ambition makes them resistant to the ring's corruption, whose lack of power makes them invisible to the enemy's surveillance, whose love of simple, ordinary domestic pleasures makes them immune to the kind of temptation that corrupts kings and wizards and dark lords. Gandalf sees in the hobbits the answer to a problem that no one else has even identified, the problem of who can carry the ring. This insight is unique to Gandalf. This insight comes from Gandalf's method, from the friendships, from the visits, from the long afternoons of pipe smoking and storytelling, and the patient, humble, entirely unheroic work of getting to know people. Saruman would never have made this discovery. Saruman does not visit hobbits. Saruman does not smoke pipes with farmers. Saruman studies lore and ringcraft and the grand strategic architecture of the struggle against Sauron. Saruman's knowledge is vast, but Saruman's knowledge is abstract, built from books and research, not from the ground level, face-to-face, person-to-person intimacy that Gandalf's method produces. Gandalf's decision to invest in the hobbits is the most consequential strategic decision in the history of the War of the Ring. Without it, there is no quest. Without it, there is no Bilbo, no Frodo, no Sam, no ring-bearer. Without Gandalf's 2,000-year habit of walking among the small peoples and paying attention to the overlooked, the entire strategy that saves Middle-earth does not exist. Part 9. The Unexpected Party. In Tar 2941, Gandalf arrives at the door of a hobbit hole in Hobbiton. The hobbit's name is Bilbo Baggins, and Gandalf is about to drag him on an adventure. The story of the quest for Erebor is well known from The Hobbit, from the films, from the countless retellings and adaptations that have made the story of Bilbo and the dwarves and the dragon one of the most beloved adventure narratives in the history of fantasy literature. But what most fans miss, what the light-hearted fairy tale tone of The Hobbit tends to obscure, is that the quest for Erebor is, from Gandalf's perspective, a deeply strategic operation. Gandalf does not send Bilbo on an adventure because Gandalf thinks adventures are fun. Gandalf sends Bilbo because Gandalf is worried about Smaug. Smaug the Golden, the great fire drake of the north, the last of the truly great dragons, the monster that destroyed the dwarf kingdom of Erebor and the city of Dale into 2770, and that has been sleeping on a mountain of stolen treasure for 171 years. Smaug is a strategic problem. Smaug is sitting on top of the Lonely Mountain, at the junction of the trade routes between the Iron Hills, the Grey Mountains, and the lands of the East. Smaug, if roused by Sauron, could become an instrument of the enemy, a flying weapon of mass destruction, deployed against the kingdoms of the north at the worst possible moment. Gandalf wants Smaug dead. Gandalf has been thinking about the dragon problem for years, has been looking for a way to neutralize Smaug before Sauron can recruit him. And Gandalf's solution is not military. Gandalf's solution is a hobbit. The reasoning is pure Gandalf. A small party, moving quietly, approaching the dragon's lair through the back door, the secret entrance that the dragon does not know about. No army, no siege, no dramatic confrontation of force against force. A burglar, a hobbit burglar, recruited from the Shire, paired with a company of dwarves who have a legitimate grudge against the dragon and a legitimate claim to the treasure. The plan works, not in the way Gandalf expected, not through the neat, controlled, predictable execution of a strategic design. The plan works through the messy, chaotic, improvisational genius that characterizes everything Gandalf does. Bilbo finds the ring in Gollum's cave. Bilbo confronts the dragon. The dragon is killed, not by Bilbo, not by the dwarves, but by Bard the bowman of Lake Town, firing a black arrow at the one weak spot in Smaug's armor. The Battle of Five Armies erupts. The Lonely Mountain is reclaimed. The Battle of Five Armies is a lesson in Gandalf's strategic method. Gandalf does not plan the battle. Gandalf does not command the armies. Gandalf negotiates, tries to prevent the battle, tries to broker a peace between the dwarves, the men and the elves, who are all claiming shares of the dragon's hoard. When the orcs arrive, when the real enemy appears, descending from the mountains in numbers that make the dispute over treasure look petty and absurd, Gandalf is the one who sees the larger picture, who recognizes that the three armies must unite or die separately. The battle reveals the pattern that will repeat throughout Gandalf's career. The initial plan produces an unexpected crisis. The crisis forces improvisation. The improvisation requires alliances that did not exist before the crisis. And the alliances hold because Gandalf has done the invisible, preparatory work of building trust, the work of showing up, of being known, of being the person that the elven king and the dwarf lord and the human bowman can all agree to listen to when the situation demands cooperation. And Gandalf, who was there for some of it and absent for other parts of it, achieves his strategic objective. The dragon is dead, the mountain is secure, and the northern kingdoms have a powerful dwarf fortress guarding the approaches from the east. The significance of this achievement only becomes clear years later, during the War of the Ring, when Erebor holds against Sauron's eastern armies, when the dwarves and the men of Dale defend the Lonely Mountain against a siege that would have overwhelmed them if the mountain had still been occupied by a dragon. Part 10. What Gandalf learned. The quest for Erebor teaches Gandalf several things, and one of those things changes the course of history. Gandalf learns that hobbits are exactly what he suspected they might be: tougher, braver, more resourceful, and more morally resilient than anyone gives them credit for. Bilbo faces trolls, goblins, a dragon, and a corrupting magical ring. And Bilbo comes through all of it with his essential hobbitness intact. Bilbo is not corrupted. Bilbo is not broken. Bilbo is changed, deepened, matured, made braver by the experience. But Bilbo remains, at his core, the same decent, generous, slightly fussy hobbit who left Bag End complaining about pocket handkerchiefs. Gandalf files this information away. Gandalf will need it later. But there is something else, something that Gandalf notices but does not yet understand. Bilbo has a ring. A magic ring that Bilbo found in the goblin tunnels beneath the Misty Mountains. A ring that makes Bilbo invisible. A ring that Bilbo is unusually reluctant to talk about, unusually possessive of, unusually protective of. Gandalf is curious. But Gandalf does not yet suspect the truth. The ring's identity, its true identity as the One Ring, the Master Ring, the instrument of Sauron's domination, is not yet apparent. Gandalf files the ring away as a mystery to be investigated later. There are more pressing concerns. The shadow in Mirkwood is growing again, and the necromancer must be dealt with. Part 11. The White Council strikes. In the same year as the quest for Erebor to 2941, the White Council finally acts against Dol Guldur. Gandalf has been pushing for this action for decades. Gandalf has been arguing, pleading, insisting, demanding that the White Council investigate Dol Guldur, confront the necromancer, determine once and for all whether the power in the fortress is Sauron or something lesser. Saruman has been resisting, has been deflecting, delaying, finding reasons to postpone the confrontation. What Gandalf does not know, what Gandalf will not discover until much later, is that Saruman has been resisting for a reason. Saruman has been studying the rings of power. Saruman has been researching ring lore, searching for the One Ring, hoping to find the ring for himself. Saruman has been delaying the attack on Dol Guldur because Saruman does not want Sauron driven from Mirkwood. Because Saruman hopes that Sauron's presence near the Gladden Fields, where the ring was lost, might draw the ring to the surface. But in 2941, Saruman changes his mind. Saruman discovers that Sauron is also searching for the ring. Discovers that Sauron's agents are combing the Anduin, searching the Gladden Fields, drawing dangerously close to finding what Saruman himself wants. Saruman agrees to the attack, not to help the Free Peoples, but to prevent Sauron from finding the ring before Saruman does. The irony is bitter. The White Council, the Council of the Wise, the most powerful alliance of good in Middle-earth, finally acts against Sauron, not because of Gandalf's decades of warnings, but because of Saruman's self-interest. The attack that Gandalf has been requesting for years is approved not because the Council believes it is right, but because Saruman's greed compels him to protect his own interests. The right thing is done for the wrong reason, a pattern that Tolkien uses throughout his mythology to illustrate the ways in which Providence works through the tangled, compromised, morally imperfect decisions of flawed beings. The White Council drives Sauron from Dol Guldur. The necromancer is revealed to be Sauron. Gandalf's suspicion is confirmed. But the victory is hollow. Sauron has been planning this retreat. Sauron allows himself to be driven from Mirkwood because Sauron's true stronghold, Mordor, is already prepared. Sauron withdraws to Borodocer the Dark Tower and declares himself openly. The shadow that has been growing in secret for 2,000 years steps into the light. Gandalf's reaction to this revelation is not triumph. Gandalf's reaction is dread. The enemy is identified. The enemy is located. The enemy is out in the open. And the enemy is far more powerful, far more prepared, far more dangerous than Gandalf had hoped. The centuries of delay, Saruman's centuries of delay, have cost the Free Peoples dearly. Sauron has used the time. Sauron has rebuilt his armies, his fortresses, his networks of spies and agents. Sauron has used the watchful peace and the decades of Saruman's procrastination to prepare for a war that the Free Peoples are not ready to fight. Part 12. The Long Peace. The years between the quest for Erebor and the beginning of the Lord of the Rings, between Tar 2941 and Tar 3001, are 60 years of relative peace. 60 years in which the shadow grows, but does not yet strike. 60 years in which Gandalf continues to travel, continues to watch, continues to build the network of relationships that will be needed when the storm breaks. During these 60 years, Gandalf does something that seems unremarkable, but that is, in retrospect, one of the most important things he has ever done. Gandalf visits Bilbo regularly. Gandalf comes to the Shire, sits in Bilbo's parlour at Bag End, smokes a pipe, drinks tea, and talks about old adventures and new worries and the state of the world beyond the Shire's borders. These visits have a purpose. Gandalf is watching the ring. Gandalf is watching the way Bilbo handles the ring, watching for signs of corruption, watching for the telltale changes that a ring of power produces in its bearer. And Gandalf is seeing things that worry him. Bilbo is aging well, too well. Bilbo is 111 years old and looks no older than 50. Bilbo's vitality is unnatural, sustained by the ring's influence, preserved by the same power that preserved Gollum for 500 years in the dark beneath the misty mountains. Bilbo is also becoming possessive. Bilbo carries the ring with him everywhere, keeps it in his pocket, reaches for it, touches it, wraps his hand around it when he thinks no one is watching. Bilbo refers to the ring as my precious, a phrase that Gandalf has heard before, in the story of Gollum, in the dark tale of a creature consumed by a ring that promised everything and took everything away. Gandalf worries. Gandalf does not yet know that Bilbo's ring is the One Ring, but Gandalf knows that the ring is dangerous. Gandalf knows that the ring is doing something to Bilbo, changing Bilbo, slowly, subtly, in ways that Bilbo himself does not recognize. Part 13. The Birthday Party. September 20 Suk to 3001, Bilbo's 111st birthday. The birthday party that changes everything. Gandalf arrives in the Shire for the party. Gandalf brings fireworks, the famous fireworks, the rockets and fountains, and a great golden dragon that swoops over the heads of the partygoers. Gandalf is performing. Gandalf is entertaining. Gandalf is playing the role that the hobbits expect, the role of the wandering wizard, the entertainer, the harmless old conjurer who brings excitement to the Shire's quiet, comfortable, unchanging life. The party itself is magnificent. 144 guests, a gross, a number that delights the mathematically inclined hobbits. There are speeches, songs, food in quantities that would stagger the less gastronomically ambitious races. There are presents for everyone. Bilbo is giving away his possessions, clearing his house, preparing for a departure that only Gandalf fully understands. The fireworks are the centerpiece. Gandalf has been making fireworks for decades, perhaps centuries. The rockets that burst over the party field are not simple explosions of colored light. The fireworks are art, complex, multi-layered, narrative displays that tell stories in fire and sound. The golden dragon that swoops over Bywater is so realistic that the hobbits duck and squeal, and the more excitable among them fling themselves flat on the grass. Gandalf watches from the side, his pipe in his hand, his eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a craftsman who knows his work is good. But Gandalf is also watching. Gandalf is watching Bilbo carefully, watching for the signs, watching for the changes, watching for the moment when the ring's influence becomes undeniable. The moment comes. Bilbo announces that he is leaving the Shire. Bilbo puts on the ring, vanishes, and the hobbits of the Shire are left staring at an empty platform. Bilbo has disappeared, has used the ring in front of the entire community, has displayed its power publicly, has drawn attention to an artifact that Gandalf increasingly suspects should not be drawing attention at all. Gandalf goes to Bag End. Gandalf finds Bilbo packing. And then comes the confrontation. The quiet, tense, heartbreaking conversation between Gandalf and his oldest friend, in which Gandalf asks Bilbo to leave the ring behind. Bilbo resists. The resistance is ugly, uncharacteristic, frightening, a glimpse of what the ring does to even the best and most decent of its bearers. Bilbo calls the ring my precious. Bilbo accuses Gandalf of wanting the ring for himself. Bilbo, the kindest and most generous hobbit in the Shire, becomes for a terrible moment something twisted, something grasping, something that is not Bilbo at all. Gandalf does not take the ring by force. Gandalf does not command Bilbo or overpower him, or use his Maiar authority to compel obedience. Gandalf reasons with Bilbo. Gandalf appeals to Bilbo's decency, to the memory of who Bilbo was before the ring began its work. And Bilbo, the real Bilbo, the hobbit beneath the ring's corruption, responds. Bilbo sets the ring down. Bilbo walks out of Bag End. Bilbo leaves the ring behind for his nephew Frodo. This moment is Gandalf's method in its purest form. No force, no domination. Just the patient, gentle, heartbreakingly difficult work of calling someone back to themselves, of reminding them who they are, of trusting that the person underneath the corruption is still there, still reachable, still capable of making the right choice. Part 14. The 17-year gap. Most fans do not realize that there is a 17-year gap in The Lord of the Rings. Between Bilbo's birthday party in Tar 3001 and Gandalf's return to the Shire in Tar 3018, 17 years pass. The films compress this gap into what appears to be a few weeks or months. The books are explicit, 17 years. 17 years during which Frodo lives quietly in the Shire with the ring in his keeping, and Gandalf travels the length and breadth of Middle-earth searching for the truth. Gandalf suspects that Bilbo's ring is a ring of power. Gandalf suspects that it might even be the One Ring. But suspicion is not certainty, and Gandalf, who has spent 2,000 years being careful, being patient, being thorough, will not act on suspicion alone. Gandalf begins the investigation. Gandalf travels to Minas Tirith, to the archives of Gondor, the great library where the records of the realm have been kept for thousands of years. Gandalf searches the archives, reading through scrolls and documents that have not been touched in centuries, looking for the specific piece of evidence that will confirm or deny his suspicion. The research takes years. Gandalf is not simply leafing through a card catalogue. Gandalf is searching through centuries of accumulated records in Quenya, in Sindarin, in the Westron of different eras, in the cramped handwriting of scribes who have been dead for 1,000 years. The archives of Minas Tirith are vast, disorganized by the standards of modern scholarship, and stored in the deep vaults of the citadel where the climate preserves the parchment, but the lighting makes reading a challenge. Denethor does not make the search easy. Denethor, who is already steward when Gandalf comes searching, regards the wizard's interest in the archives with suspicion. Denethor does not trust Gandalf. Denethor sees the wizard's visits to Minas Tirith. The visits that Gandalf makes, the relationships that Gandalf builds with the city's captains and soldiers and ordinary citizens, as a form of encroachment, a subtle undermining of the steward's authority. Gandalf must navigate Denethor's pride while searching for the evidence that will change the world. Gandalf finds it. Gandalf finds the scroll of Isildur, the account that Isildur wrote of his taking of the ring, the description of the ring's properties, the record of the letters of fire that appear on the ring's surface when it is heated. Isildur's scroll describes the ring in terms that match Bilbo's ring exactly. The size, the weight, the way it makes the bearer invisible, the inscription that appears in the language of Mordor when the ring is placed in flame. The confirmation is devastating. Gandalf now knows with certainty, knows beyond doubt, that the ring in Frodo's pocket is the One Ring, the most dangerous object in Middle-earth, the instrument of Sauron's will, the key to Sauron's return to full power. Gandalf leaves Minas Tirith. Gandalf rides north, urgently, racing against time and distance. The ring must be moved. The ring must be taken from the Shire before Sauron's agents find it. The ring must be destroyed. Part 15. The Hunt for Gollum. But Gandalf does not go directly to the Shire. Gandalf makes a detour, a long, difficult, dangerous detour that takes him deep into the wildernesses of Rhovanion and costs him precious time. Gandalf hunts for Gollum. Gollum Smaggle, the wretched creature who held the ring for nearly 500 years in the roots of the Misty Mountains, who lost the ring to Bilbo in the Riddle game, who has been wandering the world ever since, driven by the ring's pull, searching for the thief who stole his precious. Gandalf needs to find Gollum, because Gandalf needs to know what Gollum knows. Gollum has been captured by Sauron, has been taken to Mordor, has been tortured. What has Gollum told Sauron? How much does the enemy know? Does Sauron know the ring's location? Does Sauron know about the Shire? Does Sauron know the name Baggins? Gandalf tracks Gollum through the dead marshes, through the edges of Mordor's territory, through the dark and dangerous borderlands where Sauron's influence seeps into the world like poison into groundwater. The hunt takes years. Gollum is slippery, cunning, desperate, a creature driven by obsession and fear, impossible to catch and impossible to predict. The hunt is one of the least told chapters of Gandalf's journey, and one of the most grueling. Gandalf is walking through enemy territory. Gandalf is searching for a single, wretched creature in the vastness of Rhovanion and the Wilderlands, a creature who does not want to be found, who knows the hiding places and the dark corners and the underground passages that centuries of skulking have taught him. The hunt requires Gandalf to cover hundreds of miles of hostile territory, to question reluctant witnesses, to follow trails that go cold and pick up trails that lead nowhere, to endure the frustration of searching for a needle in a continent-sized haystack. Aragorn is hunting separately. The Ranger of the North, acting on Gandalf's request, has been tracking Gollum through the same wilderness, using the woodcraft and the tracking skills that the Denadane have honed over centuries of ranging in the wild. Aragorn and Gandalf are working the same hunt from different angles, covering different ground, sharing information when their paths cross. Gandalf eventually captures Gollum with the help of Aragorn, who finally corners the creature in the dead marshes. The capture is described in only a few lines of text, but the effort behind it represents years of travel, years of searching, years of patient, grinding, dangerous work in the most hostile territories in Middle-earth. Gandalf interrogates Gollum. Gandalf uses his Maya insight, his 2,000 years of experience with the corrupted and the broken, his deep, compassionate, Nienna-taught understanding of suffering, and Gandalf extracts from Gollum the terrible truth. Gollum has told Sauron everything. Gollum has spoken the words Shire and Baggins under torture in the dungeons of Barad-dûrthr. Sauron knows where the ring is. Sauron's agents are already on their way. Gandalf delivers Gollum to Thranduil's realm in Mirkwood to be kept prisoner by the Wood Elves. Then Gandalf rides for the Shire, rides with desperate urgency, racing the Nazgul, racing Sauron's shadow, racing the clock that has been ticking since Gollum spoke the words that will lead the enemy to Frodo's door. Part 16. The fire test. Gandalf arrives at Bag End. Gandalf finds Frodo. And Gandalf performs the test that confirms what he already knows. Gandalf tells Frodo to throw the ring into the fire. Frodo obeys, drops the ring into the hearth, watches it sit among the coals, untouched by the heat, unchanged by the flame. And then Gandalf reaches into the fire with tongs, pulls the ring out, and examines its surface. The letters appear. The inscription, in the black speech of Mordor, the words that Sauron spoke when he forged the ring in the fires of Mount Doom 3,000 years ago. The words that Isildur recorded, that Gandalf found in the archives of Minas Tirith, that confirm beyond any remaining doubt the identity of the small gold ring that a hobbit found in a cave beneath the Misty Mountains. Gandalf speaks the words. Gandalf speaks the black speech in the Shire, in the parlour of Bag End, in the heart of the most peaceful, most innocent, most protected community in Middle-earth. The words darken the room. The words chill the air. The words bring the shadow of Mordor into the Shire for the first time, and the effect is devastating. A reminder that the darkness is real, that the danger is immediate, that the quiet comfort of Bag End is no longer protection against the forces that are coming. The conversation that follows is one of the most important conversations in the entire mythology. Gandalf tells Frodo the truth about the ring. Gandalf tells Frodo about Sauron, about the rings of power, about the war that is coming, and the role that the ring will play. Gandalf tells Frodo that the ring must be destroyed, must be taken to Mordor, to the fires of Mount Doom, to the only place in the world where the ring can be unmade. And Gandalf tells Frodo something else, something that reveals the depth of Gandalf's 2,000-year understanding of the world's moral architecture. Gandalf tells Frodo about Gollum. Gandalf tells Frodo that Gollum is pitiable, that Gollum deserves mercy, that the creature who held the ring for 500 years and who was twisted and broken by it is not beyond compassion. Frodo is horrified. Frodo says that Gollum deserves death. And Gandalf replies with the words that will echo through the rest of the story: "Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment." The line is not wisdom in the abstract. The line is the product of 2,000 years of traveling among the suffering, the broken, the lost. The line is the product of Nienna's teaching. The line is the product of a being who has spent his entire existence in Middle-earth cultivating compassion, who has learned, through centuries of experience, that mercy is not weakness, and that judgment is not justice, and that the fate of the world may depend on the compassion of a hobbit toward a creature that no one else would spare. Part 17. Leaving the Shire. Gandalf sends Frodo on his way. The plan is simple. Frodo will leave the Shire, travel to Bree, meet Gandalf there, and then continue to Rivendell, where the wise will decide what to do with the ring. But Gandalf does not go to Bree. Gandalf does not meet Frodo at the Prancing Pony. Gandalf is supposed to be there, is supposed to be waiting, is supposed to be guiding Frodo through the first and most dangerous stage of the journey. Instead, Frodo arrives at Bree and finds a dark-haired ranger named Strider waiting in the corner of the inn, and a letter from Gandalf that arrived months ago and was almost never delivered. Where is Gandalf? Gandalf is in Isengard. Gandalf is a prisoner. Part 18. The Betrayal. This is one of the darkest chapters of Gandalf's 2,000-year journey. The moment when the wizard, who has spent his entire existence building alliances, discovers that his most important ally has become his enemy. Gandalf rides to Isengard seeking counsel. Gandalf goes to Saruman, goes to the head of his order, the leader of the Istari, the wizard who is supposed to be his superior and his ally in the struggle against Sauron. Gandalf goes to Saruman because Gandalf needs advice, needs support, needs the combined wisdom and power of the wizard order to face the crisis that is unfolding. Saruman has fallen. Saruman has been studying the ring for too long. Saruman has been gazing into the palantir of Orthanc, the seeing stone that connects Isengard to Barad Dûchtur, and the palantir has shown Saruman things. The palantir has shown Saruman Sauron's power, Sauron's armies, Sauron's preparation for a war that Saruman believes the Free Peoples cannot win. The palantir has corrupted Saruman, has convinced Saruman that resistance is futile, that the only rational course is to join Sauron or to find the ring and use it for himself. Saruman's fall is the corruption of intelligence by pride. Saruman is brilliantly intelligent, more intelligent in certain respects than Gandalf. Saruman understands the mechanics of power better than anyone in Middle-earth. Saruman understands ring lore, understands the science of Sauron's domination, understands the strategic realities of the coming war with a clarity that even Gandalf cannot match. But Saruman's intelligence has led him to a conclusion that intelligence alone cannot resist. The conclusion that Sauron will win. That resistance is futile, that the only rational course is to join the winning side or to seize the winning weapon. The conclusion is rational, but wrong. The conclusion is wrong because it ignores the irrational, ignores the courage of hobbits, ignores the loyalty of friends, ignores the unpredictable, uncontrollable, magnificently stubborn refusal of free beings to accept the supposedly inevitable. Saruman's mistake is the mistake of a mind that trusts calculation over faith, that trusts analysis over hope, that trusts the measurable over the meaningful. Saruman reveals his treachery. Saruman offers Gandalf a choice: join Sauron or join Saruman, or refuse both and be imprisoned. Gandalf refuses. Gandalf refuses both the temptation and the threat, refuses to betray the mission, refuses to abandon the free peoples, refuses to compromise the principle that has governed his entire 2,000-year journey, that power is not the answer, that domination is not the solution, that the only way to defeat the shadow is to strengthen the light. Saruman imprisons Gandalf on the pinnacle of Orthanc, the needle-sharp tower of Isengard, hundreds of feet above the ground, exposed to the wind and the rain and the cold. Gandalf is trapped. Gandalf is isolated. Gandalf is cut off from Frodo, from Aragorn, from the entire network of allies and friends that he has spent 2,000 years building. The imprisonment is a catastrophe, not because Gandalf is in physical danger. Gandalf can endure cold and exposure and deprivation. The imprisonment is a catastrophe because Gandalf is not at Bree. Gandalf is not guiding Frodo. Gandalf is not there to protect the ring-bearer at the most vulnerable moment of the journey, the moment when Frodo is leaving the Shire for the first time, when the Nazgul are riding through the countryside, when a single mistake could deliver the ring to Sauron. Part 19. The Eagle. Gandalf is rescued by Gwaihir the Windlord, the Great Eagle, the Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains. Gwaihir comes to Orthanc carrying a message from Radagast and finds Gandalf imprisoned on the tower's summit. The rescue is one of the most cinematic moments in The Lord of the Rings. The moment when Gandalf, trapped, powerless, isolated from everything and everyone he has spent 2,000 years building, is carried to freedom on the back of a giant eagle. The moment is visually spectacular. But the moment is also strategically devastating, because Gandalf does not go to the Shire. Gandalf cannot go to the Shire. Gandalf is too late. The Nazgul are already between Gandalf and the Shire. The roads are watched. The danger is too great. Gandalf goes instead to Rohan, to the court of King Thodin, where Gandalf borrows the horse Shadowfax, the greatest of the mirrors, the Lord of Horses, the only mount in Middle-earth fast enough to carry Gandalf where he needs to go. The borrowing of Shadowfax is a turning point in Gandalf's travels. For 2,000 years, Gandalf has walked. Gandalf has walked the roads of Middle-earth on foot, covering the vast distances between the Shire and Rivendell and Mirkwood and Gondor at the pace of an old man with a staff. The walking is part of Gandalf's method. The pace allows Gandalf to stop, to talk, to linger, to build the relationships that the mission requires. But the time for walking is over. The time for patience is over. The time for the slow, deliberate, century-spanning cultivation of alliances is over. The ring is in the open. Sauron is hunting. The Nazgul are riding. And Gandalf, for the first time in his 2,000-year journey, needs speed. Shadowfax provides it. The great silver horse carries Gandalf across the plains of Rohan, through the Gap of Rohan, northward toward the Shire, And then, when Gandalf learns that Frodo has already left, eastward toward Bree and Weathertop, and the road to Rivendell. Part 20. Weathertop. Gandalf reaches Weathertop, Amon's Slell, the ancient watchtower on the hill above the Great East Road, and finds evidence of battle. The Nazgul have been here. The summit is scorched. The signs of conflict are fresh. Gandalf was at Weathertop before Frodo arrived. Gandalf climbed the hill, and the Nazgul found him. 5 of the 9 attacked Gandalf on the summit of Amon's Slell, and Gandalf fought them through the night. Gandalf used fire, the bright, burning, cleansing fire that is Gandalf's signature, the fire that Narya kindled, the fire that drives back the shadow and the cold and the spiritual corruption of the ring wraiths. The battle was a stalemate. Gandalf could not destroy the Nazgul. The Nazgul cannot be destroyed except by the destruction of the ring or the direct intervention of the Valar. But the Nazgul could not overcome Gandalf, could not break through the fire, could not overwhelm the will of a Maiar wielding one of the 3 rings. The battle produced no victor, but it produced a consequence. The Nazgul knew that Gandalf was in the area, and the Nazgul feared that the ring might be with him. The battle delayed the Nazgul. The battle drew the Nazgul's attention to Gandalf and away from Frodo, who was travelling separately with Aragorn. The delay was unintentional. Gandalf did not plan to fight the Nazgul at Weathertop, did not plan to serve as a diversion. But the effect was real. The Nazgul, busy with Gandalf, sent fewer riders to the road where Frodo was travelling. The confrontation at Weathertop saved Frodo time that Frodo desperately needed, time that might have made the difference between reaching Rivendell and being overtaken on the road. Gandalf leaves Weathertop. Gandalf continues eastward, searching for Frodo, following the trail that Aragorn has left through the wilderness. Gandalf is days behind. Gandalf is too late, always arriving after the crisis has passed, always finding the aftermath rather than the event. The timing is agonizing. The gap between Gandalf and Frodo, the gap that Saruman's betrayal created, will not close until Rivendell. Part 21. Rivendell. Gandalf reaches Rivendell. Frodo reaches Rivendell. The ring reaches Rivendell. And for the first time since Bilbo's birthday party, Gandalf and the ring are in the same place, in the last homely house, under the protection of Elrond, surrounded by the greatest concentration of elven power remaining in Middle-earth. The Council of Elrond assembles. The Council is the turning point of the Lord of the Rings. The moment when the Free Peoples confront the truth about the ring and make the decision that will determine the fate of the world. Gandalf's role at the Council is crucial. Gandalf presents the evidence, tells the story of the ring's discovery, the story of Gollum's capture and interrogation, the story of Isildur's scroll, the story of the fire test at Bag End. Gandalf lays out the strategic situation, Sauron's strength, Sauron's intention, Sauron's expectation that someone among the Free Peoples will try to use the ring against him. And Gandalf advocates for the strategy that no one else would have proposed. Destroy the ring. Not use it. Not hide it. Not send it over the sea. Destroy it. Carry it into the heart of Mordor, into the fire of Orodruin where it was forged, and unmake it. The strategy is insane. The strategy requires walking into the most heavily defended territory in Middle-earth, past armies and fortresses and the Eye of Sauron itself, and throwing away the most powerful weapon in the world. The strategy requires giving up the one advantage the Free Peoples possess, the one weapon that could match Sauron's power, in exchange for the gamble that a small party, moving quietly, could reach the one place in the world where the ring can be destroyed. Gandalf advocates for this strategy because Gandalf understands something that no one else at the council fully grasps. The ring cannot be used. The ring cannot be wielded against Sauron, because the ring is Sauron, is a piece of Sauron's will, an extension of Sauron's consciousness, an instrument that serves Sauron's purpose regardless of who holds it. Anyone who tries to use the ring against Sauron will be corrupted by the ring, and will become, in the end, another Sauron, another tyrant, another dominator, another Dark Lord wearing a different face. The council agrees. Frodo volunteers to carry the ring. The fellowship is formed. And Gandalf, who has been walking alone for 2,000 years, building his network one friendship at a time, connecting the free peoples through the slow, patient, deeply personal work of showing up and caring, Gandalf joins the fellowship as its guide. Part 22. The Road South. The fellowship leaves Rivendell on December 25 of 3018. 9 walkers against the 9 riders, Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. The fellowship travels south along the western side of the Misty Mountains, through the wild country of Hollin, heading for the Gap of Rohan, or the pass over the mountains at the Redhorn Gate. Gandalf knows this road. Gandalf has walked this road before, has walked it dozens of times, perhaps hundreds, over the course of his 2,000-year career. Gandalf knows every hill, every valley, every ford, every shelter along the route. Gandalf's knowledge of the road is not academic. It is the intimate, personal, ground-level knowledge of someone who has walked the road in every season, in every weather, under every condition, for 2 millennia. The road is dangerous. The road passes through Hollin Eregion, the ancient elven realm where the rings of power were forged, where Celebrimbor worked with Sauron in the guise of Anatar to create the Great Rings. Hollin is empty now, a wilderness of stones and ruins, haunted by the memory of the elves who lived there and the catastrophe that destroyed them. But Hollin is also watched. Saruman's spies, the Crebain, the flocks of black crows that serve as Saruman's aerial surveillance, are scanning the countryside, searching for the Fellowship, reporting its movements to Isengard. Gandalf leads the Fellowship south through Hollin, watching the sky, reading the weather, making the 1,000 small navigational decisions that a journey through wilderness requires. The weather turns. Snow begins to fall. The path narrows. The mountains loom. Part 23. Caradhras. The Fellowship attempts the Redhorn Gate, the pass over the Misty Mountains at the foot of Caradhras, the mountain that the dwarves call the Redhorn and that the elves call Barazinbar. The attempt fails. The mountain defeats them. Snow, wind, cold, the elements conspire against the Fellowship, piling snow on the path, burying the hobbits, making the pass impossible. Gandalf fights the mountain with fire, lights fire after fire on the mountainside, trying to melt a path through the snow, trying to keep the Fellowship warm, trying to push through the pass by sheer will and Maiar strength. But the mountain resists. The mountain wins. Whether Caradhras is acting on its own, whether the mountain is hostile as some of the company suggest, or whether Sauron or Saruman is directing the storm, the result is the same. The Fellowship cannot cross the Misty Mountains at the Redhorn Gate. The failure forces a choice, the most consequential choice of Gandalf's journey. There are 3 options. The Fellowship can turn south and go through the Gap of Rohan, past Isengard, past Saruman's fortress, through territory that Saruman controls. The Fellowship can try the long way around, a detour of weeks or months, through the distant southern passes, adding an unacceptable delay to a mission that cannot afford delay. Or the Fellowship can go under the mountains, through Moria, through the ancient dwarf kingdom of Khazad-dûm, through the darkness beneath the Misty Mountains. Gandalf does not want to go through Moria. Gandalf argues against Moria. Gandalf's reluctance is deep and specific. Not the general caution of a leader who prefers the safer route, but the pointed, almost frightened reluctance of someone who knows what waits in the dark. Because Gandalf knows. Gandalf knows about the Balrog. Gandalf has known about the Balrog for a long time. Gandalf knows the history of Moria, knows that the dwarves woke something terrible in the deep, knows that the something drove the dwarves from their kingdom, knows that Balin's expedition to reclaim Moria was destroyed. Gandalf knows what destroyed it. Gandalf knows that the darkness in Moria is not a remnant of Sauron's power or a colony of orcs that can be fought through. Gandalf knows that the darkness in Moria is a Balrog, a Maya of Morgoth, a being of the same fundamental nature as Gandalf himself, a creature that has been sleeping in the deep since the First Age and that cannot be defeated by an old man with a staff. Gandalf goes anyway. The Fellowship overrules Gandalf's reluctance, or rather the circumstances overrule it. The Gap of Rohan is too dangerous. The southern passes are too slow. Moria is the only option. And Gandalf, who confessed to the Valar 2,000 years ago that he feared Sauron and was not strong enough for the task, leads the Fellowship into the darkness that he has been dreading since before the journey began. Part 24. Moria. The Fellowship enters Moria. The doors of Durin open, the ancient entrance on the western side of the mountains. The doors that Gandalf has passed through before, in other centuries, on other journeys, when Moria was still alive, still inhabited, still the beating heart of dwarven civilization. Moria is dead. The halls are empty. The forges are cold. The dwarves who once filled these tunnels with light and noise and the clamour of craftsmanship are gone, killed, driven out, consumed by the nameless terror that rose from the deep when the dwarves dug too greedily and too deep. Gandalf leads the Fellowship through the darkness. Gandalf knows the way, knows the tunnels, knows the junctions, knows the landmarks that guide travellers through the labyrinth of Moria's halls. Gandalf's knowledge is old, decades old, perhaps centuries old. And some of the passages have changed, some of the landmarks have been destroyed, some of the routes that Gandalf remembers have collapsed or been blocked by the decay of the abandoned kingdom. This is Gandalf's deepest journey into the earth, the descent beneath the world, the passage through the foundations of the mountains, the journey into a darkness so complete that even Gandalf's starflight seems to shrink against it. The halls of Moria are enormous. The halls are carved for dwarves, for a civilization of craftsmen who measured their ambition in stone and their legacy in the depth of their minds. The Fellowship walks through chambers so vast that the walls are invisible in the darkness, through corridors so long that the echoes of their footsteps return from distances that seem impossible. Gandalf is navigating from memory. Gandalf is drawing on visits he made centuries ago. Visits when Moria was alive, when the halls were lit by dwarf lanterns and the forges burned, and the sound of hammers rang through the corridors. The Moria that Gandalf remembers is nothing like the Moria that the Fellowship is walking through. The Moria that Gandalf remembers was a city. The Moria that the Fellowship is walking through is a tomb. The journey through Moria takes 3 days. 3 days of darkness, of silence, of the oppressive, suffocating weight of a mountain above and a dead kingdom around, and the growing certainty that something in the darkness is watching, something in the deep is stirring, something that should have been left alone is waking up. On the second day, Gandalf finds the record. In the chamber of Mazarbul, the record room, where Belin's colony made its last stand, Gandalf finds the Book of Mazarbul, the chronicle of Belin's expedition. The record that tells the story of the dwarves who came back to Moria 30 years ago and who were killed, every one of them, by the orcs that infested the mines. The last entry is chilling. The last words in the book are, "They are coming. They come. The orcs come. The goblins come. The trolls come." The Fellowship fights in the Chamber of Mazarbul, fights in the corridors, fights a running battle through the ancient halls of Moria as Gandalf leads them toward the bridge of Khazad Diem and the eastern exit. And then something else comes. Something from the deep. Something that Gandalf has feared since before the Fellowship entered the mountains. Part 25. The Bridge. The Balrog. Durin's Bane, the demon of the ancient world, the spirit of fire and shadow, the creature that the dwarves woke in the deep places beneath the misty mountains. A Maya, a fallen Maya, a being of the same order as Gandalf himself, but corrupted by Morgoth in the world's earliest age, transformed into a weapon of destruction and terror, buried beneath the mountains since the end of the First Age, and woken by the sound of dwarf picks in the dark. The Balrog rises. The Balrog climbs from the deep, wreathed in flame, trailing shadow, carrying a sword of fire and a whip of many thongs. The Balrog is enormous, ancient, terrible. A being of such power that the orcs of Moria flee before it, that the very stones of the mountain shudder at its approach, that the air itself heats and darkens in its presence. The Fellowship reaches the bridge of Khazad Diem, the narrow span that crosses the abyss, the bridge that connects the deeps of Moria to the eastern gate. The bridge is a choke point. The bridge is where Gandalf makes his stand. Gandalf turns. Gandalf faces the Balrog alone. Gandalf stands on the bridge, the old man, the grey-cloaked wizard, the being who confessed to the Valar 2,000 years ago that he was afraid, and that the task was too great, stands on the bridge and faces a demon. "You cannot pass," Gandalf says. "Not you shall not pass." That is the film. In the book, Gandalf says, "You cannot pass." The distinction matters. Gandalf is not making a dramatic declaration. Gandalf is stating a fact. Gandalf is telling the Balrog that the bridge is held, that the Guardian is present, that the way is closed. Gandalf names himself. Gandalf declares his identity, declares that he is a servant of the secret fire, a wielder of the flame of Anna. The declaration is not posturing. The declaration is Gandalf unveiling himself, pulling back the disguise of the old man, the grey cloak, the wandering entertainer, and revealing the mire beneath. For a moment, just a moment, Gandalf is not Gandalf. Gandalf is Olrin, the servant of man, the spirit of fire and wisdom, the being who was old before the world was young. The Balrog is facing not an old man on a bridge, but an equal, a fellow Maya, a being of the same order, wearing a different shape but carrying the same ancient foundational power. The Balrog attacks. The bridge breaks. The Balrog falls. Gandalf falls. Gandalf, caught by the Balrog's whip, is dragged over the edge and into the abyss. The Fellowship watches Gandalf fall. Frodo screams. Aragorn stands stunned. The hobbits weep. The guide, the counselor, the friend, the 2,000-year traveller, gone, fallen into darkness. Lost, Part 26. The Abyss. Gandalf does not die on the bridge. Gandalf does not die in the fall. Gandalf falls with the Balrog, locked together, plunging into the chasm beneath the bridge of Khazad Diem, falling through the darkness into the deepest places of the world. They fall into water. They fall into the subterranean lake beneath Moria, the lake that lies at the bottom of the abyss, the dark water that fills the foundations of the mountain. The fall into water saves Gandalf's body, breaks the fall, cushions the impact, preserves the physical form that Gandalf's spirit needs to continue the fight. The Balrog's fire goes out, the water quenches the flames, and the Balrog becomes a thing of slime and darkness, a cold, wet, slimy horror, grappling with Gandalf in the black water beneath the mountain. They fight. They fight in the water, in the darkness. Blind, gasping, struggling, Gandalf's sword glamdring. The faux hammer, the ancient elven blade that once belonged to the king of Gondolin, cuts the Balrog in the dark, and the Balrog's claws tear at Gandalf, and the battle is savage, intimate, desperate. Gandalf chases the Balrog through the tunnels beneath Moria. The tunnels are old, older than the dwarves, older than the mines, older than the civilization that built Khazad-dûm. The tunnels are the foundations of the world, the deep places where the roots of the mountains grip the bones of the earth, where the darkness has never been broken by light, where no living thing has walked since the world was shaped. Gandalf describes these tunnels later, in Fangorn, in words that suggest the experience marked him as deeply as anything in his 2,000-year journey. Far, far below the deepest delving of the dwarves, Gandalf says. Tunnels and passages that the dwarves never found, that no map records, that exist in the absolute darkness beneath the known world. Gandalf walked through these passages, walked through the oldest corridors in the earth, through spaces that were carved not by tools, but by the pressure of the world's creation, through the foundations on which Middle-earth rests. The experience is harrowing. Gandalf is following a Balrog through territory that no being has traversed since the shaping of the world. Gandalf is fighting, climbing, pursuing, all in total darkness, all in a place so deep and so old that the normal categories of geography do not apply. The deep is not a cave. The deep is not a mine. The deep is the interior of the earth itself. The raw, unfinished, primordial space beneath the shaped world. The space that was never meant to be walked by the living. Gandalf follows the Balrog upward. The pursuit takes them from the deepest pit to the highest peak, from the foundations of Moria to the summit of Ziraxagil, the Silvertine, the peak that rises above Moria's eastern gate. The pursuit takes 10 days. 10 days of fighting, of climbing, of the relentless, grinding, exhausting battle between two immortal spirits locked in a contest that neither can escape. They reach the summit. They burst from the tunnels onto the peak of Ziraxagil, into the open air, into the sunlight that Gandalf has not seen in 10 days. And there, on the mountaintop, in the light and the cold and the thin air above the world, Gandalf and the Balrog fight their final battle. The battle lasts 2.5 days. The battle shatters the peak. Lightning strikes. Thunder rolls. The mountain itself is scarred by the contest, scarred by the collision of two Maiar, two ancient spirits, two beings whose power derives from the foundations of reality and whose conflict produces effects that the physical world cannot contain. Gandalf kills the Balrog. Gandalf's sword breaks the demon's fire. Gandalf's will overcomes the demon's darkness. The Balrog falls from the peak of Ziraxagil, broken, shattered, destroyed. The last Balrog in Middle-earth dies on the mountaintop. And Gandalf dies too. Part 27. Death and Return. Gandalf dies on the peak of Ziraxagil. Gandalf's body gives out, exhausted, broken, pushed beyond the limits of the physical form that the Valar gave him. Gandalf's spirit departs from the world, leaves Middle-earth, passes beyond the circles of the world, enters a state of being that Gandalf later describes in terms so vague that even Tolkien scholars cannot agree on what exactly happens. I was sent back, Gandalf says. Sent back by whom? By the Valar? By Ilúvatar? By the divine providence that governs Tolkien's universe, the providence that intervenes in the world's darkest moments, that turns apparent disaster into unexpected victory, that ensures that the music of creation is not silenced by the discord of the fallen? Gandalf is sent back. Gandalf is returned to Middle-earth, returned in a new body, returned with enhanced power, returned with a new status. Gandalf is no longer Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf is Gandalf the White, the head of the Istari, the leader of the Wizard Order, the being that Saruman was supposed to be, but that Saruman's corruption has disqualified him from being. Gandalf lies on the mountaintop. Gandalf lies naked on the peak of Ziraxigal, in the snow and the cold for days, lies in a state between death and life, between the mortal world and the world beyond, as his new body forms and his new identity crystallises, and his new purpose becomes clear. Gwaihir finds him. Gwaihir the Windlord, the same eagle who rescued Gandalf from Orthanc, finds Gandalf on the mountaintop and carries him to Lothlorien, to the Golden Wood, to the realm of Galadriel and Celeborn. Galadriel heals Gandalf. Galadriel clothes Gandalf in white, the white robes that replace the grey, the white that signifies Gandalf's new status, the white that announces to the world that the Wizard Order has a new head. Gandalf is changed. The change is not merely cosmetic, not merely a new set of robes and a new title. Gandalf's power is enhanced. Gandalf's authority is broadened. Gandalf's limitations, the restrictions that the Valar placed on the Istari, the rules that prevented the wizards from using their full power against Sauron, are loosened. Gandalf the White is permitted to do things that Gandalf the Grey was not. Gandalf the White can command. Gandalf the White can compel. Gandalf the White can match force with force in ways that the Grey Wizard was forbidden. But Gandalf the White does not become a conqueror. Gandalf the White does not abandon the methods that have defined his entire 2,000-year journey. Gandalf the White is more powerful, but the power is deployed in the same way. Through counsel, through encouragement, through the patient, stubborn, deeply personal work of strengthening others rather than dominating them. Part 28. Fangorn. Gandalf the White walks into Fangorn Forest. Fangorn, the ancient woodland at the foot of the Misty Mountains, the domain of Treebeard, the oldest of the Ents, the living remnant of the great forests that once covered all of Middle-earth. Gandalf enters Fangorn because Gandalf knows that this is where Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli are heading, tracking Merry and Pippin, who have been captured by Saruman's Uruk-hai and who have escaped into the forest. The reunion is one of the most stunning moments in The Lord of the Rings. Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, the three hunters, who have been chasing the Uruk-hai across the plains of Rohan for 3 days without rest, are tracking their quarry into the forest. They see an old man in white, leaning on a staff. They think it is Saruman. Aragorn draws his sword. Legolas knocks an arrow. Gimli raises his axe. Gandalf reveals himself. The white light blazes. The weapons are useless. The sword flies from Aragorn's hand. The arrow flies wide. The axe stroke falls short. Gandalf stands before them, white-robed, radiant, utterly different from the grey-cloaked wizard they knew, and yet unmistakably, irrevocably, profoundly the same. Gandalf, Aragorn says. And Gandalf. Gandalf who has died and returned. Gandalf who has fought a Balrog and fallen into the abyss and climbed from the deepest pit to the highest peak. Gandalf says, yes, that is what they used to call me. Gandalf, yes, I remember. I am Gandalf. The moment is strange. The moment suggests that Gandalf's return is not simply a resumption of his old identity, that the being who stands before Aragorn in Fangorn is not simply the old Gandalf with new clothes. Something has happened to Gandalf. Something has changed. The death and the return have altered Gandalf in ways that go beyond power and status, have altered the fundamental nature of Gandalf's relationship with himself, with his identity, with the mortal body and the mortal name that he has worn for 2,000 years. But the strangeness passes. The Gandalf-ness returns. The warmth, the humour, the stubborn optimism, the irritability, the impatience, the endless, tireless, infuriatingly persistent commitment to the mission. Gandalf is changed, but Gandalf is Gandalf. The old wizard, the 2,000-year traveller, the builder of alliances and the kindler of hope, he is still there, beneath the white robes and the enhanced power, still walking, still working, still fighting the long fight. Part 29. Edoras. Gandalf rides to Edoras, the golden hall of the kings of Rohan, the capital of the Horse Lords, the ancient seat of the House of Eorl. Gandalf has been to Edoras before. Gandalf knows the Rohirrim, has known them for centuries, has visited their kingdom, has built the same kind of relationships with the Horse Lords that he has built with every people in Middle-earth. Gandalf knows the halls, knows the customs, knows the fierce, proud, horse-loving culture of the people who guard the plains between Isengard and Gondor. But Edoras is sick. King Théoden sits on his throne like an old, broken, withered thing, aged beyond his years, enfeebled, manipulated by Gurma Wormtongue, the advisor who whispers Saruman's poison into the king's ear. Théoden's court is a court of despair, a court where hope has been strangled, where resistance has been abandoned, where the once proud Rohirrim are being counselled to surrender before the fight has even begun. Gandalf arrives at the gates and is met with hostility. The guards demand his weapons. Gurma has warned against the wizard, has told Théoden that Gandalf is a harbinger of trouble, that the wizard's arrival always coincides with disaster, that the old man in the grey cloak is not a helper, but a herald of misfortune. The accusation has enough truth to sting. Gandalf does arrive before trouble. Gandalf does bring bad news. The difference, the crucial, world-changing difference, is that Gandalf arrives to help with the trouble, not to cause it. The doorward asks Gandalf to leave his staff at the door. The staff, the wizard's instrument, the tool that Gandalf has carried for 2,000 years, the extension of his will and his power. Gandalf is an old man without his staff. Gandalf is an immortal spirit with his staff. The request to disarm is, in effect, a request to make the most powerful being in the room the most vulnerable person in the room. Gandalf complies, or appears to comply, allowing the staff to pass as a walking stick. The concession that allows the wizard to enter the hall armed with his most important weapon, while appearing to be unarmed. Gandalf enters the hall. Gandalf confronts Théoden. And Gandalf does what Gandalf does, not with swords, not with armies, not with the overwhelming force of a Maya unleashed, but with words, with truth, with the patient, direct, compassionate application of reality to a mind that has been buried beneath layers of poison and despair. Gandalf breaks Saruman's hold on Théoden. The exorcism, if that is what it is, strips away the corruption, strips away the despair, strips away the years of manipulation and cowardice that Wormtongue has wrapped around the king like chains. Théoden straightens. Théoden's eyes clear. Théoden's hand grips the sword that he has not held in months. The king of Rohan remembers who he is. The transformation is physical. Théoden walked into the hall as an old man, stooped, trembling, leaning on Wormtongue's arm, barely able to lift his head. Théoden stands before his people as a king, straight-backed, clear-eyed, strong. The years that Wormtongue's poison added to Théoden's appearance fall away. Not all of them. Théoden is still old, still mortal, still bearing the legitimate weight of his years. But the false age, the artificial decrepitude, the manufactured weakness, these are gone. The healing of Thodin is Gandalf's method, is everything that Gandalf's 2,000-year journey has been leading to. The healing is not domination. Gandalf does not replace Saruman's control with Gandalf's control. Gandalf frees Thodin, sets Thodin free to make his own decisions, to command his own people, to ride his own horse and fight his own fight. Gandalf does not give Thodin orders. Gandalf gives Thodin himself back. Part 30. Helm's Deep. The battle is coming. Saruman's army, 10,000 Uruk-hai, the product of Saruman's industrial breeding program, armored, armed, disciplined, marching toward Rohan with the single-minded purpose of destroying the Horse Lords, is approaching. Gandalf does not stay for the siege. Gandalf rides out from Helm's Deep on Shadowfax, rides into the night, rides west toward the scattered forces of the Rohirrim, who have been driven from their homes by Saruman's raids. Gandalf rides to find Erkenbrand. Erkenbrand, Lord of the Westfold, the military commander who has been fighting Saruman's forces in the field, who has been cut off from Edoras, who has a force of Rohirrim that could turn the tide at Helm's Deep, if they can be found, if they can be gathered, if someone can bring them to the right place at the right time. Gandalf finds Erkenbrand. Gandalf gathers the scattered riders. And at dawn, at the first light of the 5th day, as Gandalf promised Aragorn, Gandalf leads the charge down the hillside into the rear of Saruman's army. The charge breaks the siege. The Uruk-hai, caught between the defenders of the Hornburg and the riders coming down the hill, are destroyed. The victory is decisive, the destruction of Saruman's field army, the elimination of Saruman's offensive capability, the end of Saruman's threat to Rohan. But the victory is not Gandalf's alone. The victory is the product of Gandalf's network, the product of the friendships and the alliances and the relationships that Gandalf has spent centuries building. Gandalf knew Erkenbrand. Gandalf knew where to find the scattered Rohirrim. Gandalf knew the terrain, knew the timing, knew the precise moment when the charge would have maximum effect. Gandalf's 2,000-year habit of walking the roads and knowing the people produced the specific, local, tactical knowledge that made the victory possible. Part 31. Isengard. After Helm's Deep, Gandalf rides to Isengard. Isengard is destroyed. The Ents, Treebeard, and the Huorns of Fangorn Forest, roused by the hobbits Merry and Pippin, have broken the ring of Isengard. The walls are shattered, the pits are flooded. The machinery that Saruman built to arm his Uruk-hai is drowned beneath the waters that the Ents diverted from the river Isen. Saruman is trapped in Orthanc, the unbreakable tower, the ancient Menrian fortress that even the Ents cannot tear down. Saruman is powerless but unrepentant. Saruman leans from the window of Orthanc and speaks with the voice of persuasion, the voice that has manipulated kings, the voice that turns lies into truth and makes surrender sound like wisdom. Gandalf confronts Saruman. The confrontation is not a battle, it is a reckoning. Gandalf offers Saruman a chance to repent, a chance to rejoin the struggle against Sauron, a chance to redeem himself. Saruman refuses. Saruman snarls. Saruman clings to his pride and his resentment and his broken dreams of power. Gandalf breaks Saruman's staff. The breaking is symbolic and real, symbolic of Saruman's expulsion from the Wizard Order, real in its destruction of Saruman's instrument of power. Gandalf, the new head of the Istari, exercises the authority that his death and return have given him, the authority to dismiss the traitor, to strip the fallen wizard of his rank, to declare that the Order has a new leader and that the old leader is finished. Saruman's fall is Gandalf's tragedy. Saruman was supposed to be the best of them, the strongest, the wisest, the leader. Saruman's corruption is the failure of Gandalf's order, the proof that even the Valar's chosen emissaries can be broken by the darkness they were sent to fight. Gandalf's breaking of Saruman's staff is not triumphant. It is mournful. It is the end of a colleague, a superior, a fellow traveller who lost his way. Part 32. The Palantir. At Isengard, Gandalf acquires the Palantir, the seeing stone that Saruman used to communicate with Sauron, the Orthanc stone, one of the 7 Palantiri that Elendil brought from Menor in the Second Age. The acquisition of the Palantir is significant because the Palantir gives Gandalf something he has never had: direct access to Sauron's mind. Not unlimited access. The Palantir is dangerous, and using it requires a will strong enough to resist Sauron's domination through the stone. But Gandalf the White is strong enough. Gandalf the White has the authority and the power to look into the stone and resist the Dark Lord's influence, to see through Sauron's deceptions, to read Sauron's intentions, to gain intelligence about the enemy's plans. But the Palantir also creates a crisis. Pippin looks into the Palantir. The young hobbit, curious and impulsive, picks up the stone in the night and gazes into it, and Sauron is on the other side. Sauron sees Pippin. Sauron interrogates Pippin. Sauron sees a hobbit, and Sauron draws a conclusion that Gandalf immediately recognizes as both terrifying and useful. Sauron thinks Pippin has the ring. Sauron sees a hobbit with the Palantir, a hobbit in Isengard, a hobbit in Saruman's possession, and Sauron assumes that Saruman has captured the ring-bearer, that Saruman has the ring, that the ring is in Isengard. The assumption is wrong, but the assumption redirects Sauron's attention, redirects Sauron's forces, redirects Sauron's strategy toward Isengard and away from Mordor, away from the path that the real ring-bearer is taking toward Mount Doom. Gandalf recognizes the opportunity. Gandalf also recognizes the danger. Sauron will attack soon, before Saruman can use the ring against him. The attack will fall on Gondor, on Minas Tirith, on the last great fortress of the West. The war is accelerating. The time for strategy and patience is over. The time for the final confrontation is here. Gandalf takes Pippin and rides for Minas Tirith. Part 33. The ride to Minas Tirith. The ride from Isengard to Minas Tirith is one of the great journeys in The Lord of the Rings, a journey of 350 miles undertaken at full speed, on the back of Shadowfax, through the territory between the 2 great conflicts of the war. Gandalf rides day and night. Shadowfax, the Lord of Horses, covers the distance with a speed that no ordinary mount could match, galloping across the plains of Rohan, through the Gap of Rohan, along the Great West Road that connects Rohan to Gondor. Gandalf does not stop. Gandalf does not sleep. Gandalf rides with the urgency of someone who knows that time is the one resource that the Free Peoples cannot afford to waste. The ride is a masterclass in Gandalf's knowledge of the landscape. Gandalf knows every mile of this road. Gandalf knows where the fords are shallow, where the hills provide cover, where the terrain opens into the long, flat stretches that allow Shadowfax to reach full speed. 2,000 years of walking have given Gandalf the mental map that makes this ride possible. The map that tells him when to push and when to rest, when to take the main road and when to cut cross-country, when to follow the river and when to climb the ridge. Pippin rides with him. The young hobbit, shaken by his encounter with the Palantir, clings to Shadowfax's mane and watches the landscape blur past at a speed that no hobbit has ever experienced. Pippin's presence is significant. Pippin is evidence evidence that Sauron will interpret, evidence that will shape Sauron's strategy, evidence that Gandalf is carrying to Minas Tirith, not because Pippin is useful, but because Pippin is necessary. Sauron has seen a hobbit. Sauron must not see this hobbit near the hobbits who carry the ring. Gandalf is separating Pippin from Frodo the way a chess player separates a decoy from the piece that matters. Gandalf passes through the Druadan forest. Gandalf crosses the Ramas Ekor, the outer wall of the Pelennor, the defensive perimeter that surrounds Minas Tirith. Gandalf sees the city for the first time in years. The White City, Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard, the last great fortress of the Dúnedain, rising tier upon tier from the plains of the Pelennor to the pinnacle of the White Tower. The city is preparing for war. The beacon fires have been lit, the chain of mountaintop beacons that signals from Minas Tirith to Rohan, the call for aid that has not been sent in years, the ancient covenant between the two kingdoms that commits Rohan to Gondor's defense. Gandalf has arranged for the beacons. Gandalf has been building this alliance for centuries, has been nurturing the relationship between Rohan and Gondor, maintaining the contacts, keeping the covenant alive through the long decades of peace when both kingdoms were tempted to forget that they need each other. Gandalf arrives at Minas Tirith. Gandalf rides through the gates, through the 7 levels of the city, through the Court of the Fountain to the Citadel at the city's summit. Gandalf presents himself to Denethor, the steward of Gondor, the ruler of the kingdom in the king's absence, the proud, brilliant, embittered old man who has been governing Gondor alone for decades. Part 34. Denethor. The relationship between Gandalf and Denethor is one of the most complex and painful relationships in the entire mythology, a relationship built on mutual respect, mutual suspicion, mutual need, and the bitter, corrosive resentment that Denethor feels toward a wizard whom Denethor regards as a rival for the loyalty of his people. Denethor is brilliant. Denethor is one of the most intelligent men in Middle-earth, a skilled administrator, a capable military strategist, a leader who has kept Gondor intact through decades of pressure from Mordor. Denethor is also proud. Denethor resents Gandalf because Denethor sees Gandalf as a meddler, sees the wizard as someone who wanders into other people's kingdoms, offers unsolicited advice, cultivates relationships with the kingdom's subjects, and then wanders away again, leaving the steward to deal with the consequences. Denethor also has a palantir. Denethor has the Anor Stone, the seeing stone of Minas Tirith, the palantir that was kept in the White Tower for generations. Denethor has been using the Anor Stone to monitor the enemy, has been looking into the stone, watching Sauron's preparations, gathering intelligence about the coming attack. But the palantir has shown Denethor too much. The palantir has shown Denethor the scale of Sauron's forces, the armies, the siege engines, the Nazgul, the overwhelming, insurmountable tide of darkness that is about to crash against Minas Tirith's walls. The palantir has not corrupted Denethor the way it corrupted Saruman. The palantir has done something worse. The palantir has made Denethor despair. Gandalf arrives in Minas Tirith and finds a city whose ruler has already decided that the war is lost. Denethor is going through the motions, commanding the defenses, organizing the garrison, making the preparations that a competent administrator makes for a siege. But Denethor has no hope. Denethor believes that Gondor is doomed, that the West is doomed, that the darkness will triumph, and that nothing Gandalf or anyone else can do will change the outcome. Gandalf must work with Denethor despite this. Gandalf must coordinate the city's defense with a man who believes the defense is futile. Gandalf must inspire the soldiers, rally the captains, maintain the morale of a city that knows, because Denethor's despair is infectious, because despair always is, that its ruler has given up. This is Gandalf's hardest task, harder than the Balrog, harder than Saruman. The Balrog was a physical enemy, a demon to be fought, a monster to be defeated. Denethor is an ally who has lost hope, an ally whose brilliance and whose pride make him impossible to reach, impossible to counsel, impossible to help. Gandalf can fight Balrogs. Gandalf cannot fight despair that has been chosen by a mind too proud to accept help. Part 35. The Siege. The Siege of Minas Tirith is the culmination of everything Gandalf has been preparing for, the moment when the 2,000-year campaign of alliance building and relationship cultivating meets its ultimate test. Sauron's army arrives. The army is vast, the largest army assembled since the last alliance, drawn from every corner of Sauron's empire. Orcs from Mordor, Easterlings from Ren, Haradrim from the south, riding their great Makil, the war elephants of Far Harad. Trolls, Nazgul on their winged beasts. The assembled might of the Shadow, directed against the last fortress of the west. Gandalf commands the defense, not officially. Denethor is the steward, Denethor is the ruler, Denethor gives the orders. But Denethor is breaking. Denethor is retreating into his despair, retreating from the walls, retreating from responsibility. And Gandalf steps into the gap, commands where Denethor cannot, organizes where Denethor will not, rallies the defenders when the steward's silence leaves them without direction. The siege is horrifying. The catapults hurl not just stones, but the severed heads of Gondorian soldiers who fell in the retreat from Osgiliath, a psychological weapon, a terror tactic, designed to break the morale of the defenders by forcing them to see the faces of their comrades raining from the sky. Gandalf does not flinch. Gandalf has seen worse. Gandalf has seen the fall of kingdoms, the destruction of civilizations, the long, centuries-spanning erosion of everything the free peoples have built. The severed heads are terrible, but they are not the worst thing Gandalf has witnessed in 2,000 years of walking the roads of a world at war. Gandalf is everywhere. Gandalf rides Shadowfax through the streets of the lower city, directing the retreat from the outer walls. Gandalf organizes the evacuation of the wounded. Gandalf reinforces the gates with his own power, using the authority of a Maya, the fire of Narya, the full weight of his enhanced status as Gandalf the White, to hold the defenses together against an assault that would overwhelm any purely military response. Gandalf stands at the gate when the Witch King breaks it, stands in the shattered gateway of Minas Tirith, facing the chief of the Nazgul, the Lord of the Ring Wraiths, the being who has been Sauron's instrument for 4,000 years. The confrontation at the gate is one of the great moments of the Lord of the Rings. The Witch King rides through the broken gate on his black horse, robed in shadow, crowned in iron, wielding a flaming sword. No living man can stand before the Witch King. The soldiers of Gondor flee. The defenders scatter. The gate is open, and the city is falling. Gandalf does not flee. Gandalf sits on Shadowfax in the middle of the gateway and waits. Gandalf faces the Witch King alone, the wizard against the wraith, the servant of the secret fire against the servant of the shadow, the being whose mission is to kindle hope against the being whose purpose is to extinguish it. And then the horns sound. The horns of Rohan, the horns that announce the arrival of the Rohirrim, the cavalry charge that sweeps across the Pelennor fields and breaks the siege of Minas Tirith. The Witch King turns. The confrontation is interrupted. Gandalf's stand at the gate is not a victory. It is a holding action, a desperate last-ditch effort to buy time until the allies arrive. The allies arrive because Gandalf built the alliance. The Rohirrim ride because Gandalf healed Thodin. The horns sound because Gandalf spent 2,000 years walking the roads of Middle-earth, visiting kings, building friendships, maintaining the web of relationships that now, at the moment of supreme crisis, delivers the cavalry charge that saves the city. Part 36. The Pelennor Fields. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields is the greatest battle of the War of the Ring, and Gandalf's role in it is not to fight, but to lead. Gandalf does not charge with the Rohirrim. Gandalf does not ride onto the Pelennor swinging his sword. Gandalf's role in the battle is command, is the organization and coordination of the defense, the management of the retreat from the walls, the rallying of broken units, the thousand small decisions that determine whether a battle is won or lost. Thodin falls. The King of Rohan, healed by Gandalf, restored by Gandalf, given back his courage and his purpose by Gandalf, Thodin falls on the Pelennor, killed by the Witch King's flying beast, crushed beneath his own horse. The death is devastating. The death is the cost of the alliance, the price that the relationship between Gandalf and Thodin demands, the sacrifice that the war extracts from the people that Gandalf has spent his life protecting. Owen kills the Witch King, the Shield Maiden of Rohan, the woman whom the conventions of her culture told to stay home, whom the rules of the world said could not fight, whom no one expected to be standing on the Pelennor Fields at all. Owen drives her sword into the Witch King's face, and the greatest of the Nazgul is destroyed. Gandalf did not plan this. Gandalf did not foresee this. Gandalf's methods, the patient, relationship-building, alliance-cultivating methods that define his entire career, did not produce this specific outcome. The destruction of the Witch King is the product of something that Gandalf's methods cannot control: individual courage. The unplanned, unpredictable, magnificently human courage of a woman who refuses to accept the role that the world has assigned her. Gandalf's methods create the conditions for courage. Gandalf's methods cannot guarantee courage. The distinction is the distinction between planning and providence, the distinction between the strategy that Gandalf can control and the grace that Gandalf can only hope for. Part 37. Denethor's End. While the battle rages on the Pelennor, Gandalf faces his darkest moment inside the city. Denethor has broken. The Steward of Gondor, the brilliant, proud, capable ruler who held the kingdom together through decades of war, Denethor has surrendered to the despair that the Palantir planted in him. Denethor has decided that the war is lost. Denethor has decided that death is preferable to defeat. And Denethor has decided to take his wounded son Faramir with him. Denethor carries Faramir to the tombs of the stewards, to Rath Nen, the Silent Street, the burial place of the Lords of Gondor. Denethor piles wood on the burial bier. Denethor douses the wood with oil. Denethor prepares a funeral pyre for himself and for Faramir, for his son, who is not dead, who is wounded but alive, who could be saved if someone would only try. Gandalf arrives. Gandalf, who is commanding the defense of the city, who is managing the retreat from the walls, who is directing the battle from Shadowfax's back. Gandalf leaves the battle. Gandalf rides to the tombs. Gandalf confronts Denethor. The confrontation is heartbreaking. Denethor is beyond reason. Denethor is beyond counsel. Denethor has made his decision, and his pride will not allow him to unmake it. Gandalf pleads with Denethor. Pleads, argues, demands, exercises every tool of persuasion and authority that 2,000 years of practice have given him. Gandalf cannot reach Denethor. Gandalf, who healed Thodin, who freed Thodin from Saruman's influence with a word and a touch. Gandalf cannot free Denethor from his own despair. The difference between Thodin and Denethor is the difference between a mind that has been poisoned from the outside and a mind that has poisoned itself. Thodin was manipulated by Wormtongue, was the victim of an external influence that could be removed. Denethor's despair is internal, is the product of Denethor's own pride, Denethor's own intelligence, Denethor's own refusal to accept help or to admit uncertainty. Gandalf can break enchantments. Gandalf cannot break pride. Gandalf saves Faramir. Gandalf pulls the wounded man from the pyre. Gandalf rescues the son, at least, from the father's madness. But Gandalf cannot save Denethor. Denethor lights the pyre. Denethor burns. The steward of Gondor, clutching the palantir that showed him the darkness, dies in flame and madness, and the terrible, pitiable conviction that resistance is useless. Denethor's death is Gandalf's failure. Not a failure of effort. Gandalf tried everything. A failure of reach. A failure that demonstrates the limits of Gandalf's method. The limits of what counsel and friendship and patience can accomplish against a mind that has walled itself in despair. Gandalf can kindle hope. Gandalf cannot force hope on someone who has chosen to reject it. Part 38. After the battle. The battle is won. The siege is broken. The Rohirrim and the forces of Gondor, reinforced by Aragorn's arrival with the Grey Company and the army of the dead, have driven Sauron's forces from the Pelennor fields. But the victory is temporary. Gandalf knows this. The victory at the Pelennor is a reprieve, not a resolution. Sauron's armies are damaged, but not destroyed. Sauron's power is diminished, but not broken. The ring is still in the world, the ring is still moving toward Mordor, carried by Frodo and Sam, and the ring's destruction is the only thing that can end the war permanently. Gandalf's attention shifts. Gandalf's attention has always been divided, always split between the visible war, the battles and the sieges and the military campaigns that demand his attention, and the invisible war. The quiet journey of two hobbits through the enemy's territory toward the one place where the ring can be destroyed. The visible war is important, but the visible war is not the point. The point is the ring. The point has always been the ring. Gandalf proposes a plan. The plan is audacious, desperate, and strategically brilliant. March to the Black Gate of Mordor with every soldier the West can muster. Challenge Sauron directly. Offer battle on Sauron's doorstep. Not to win, not because the army can defeat Sauron's forces, but to draw Sauron's attention. To draw the eye away from Mordor's interior, away from the paths that Frodo and Sam are taking, away from the hobbits who are carrying the fate of the world on their backs. The plan is a diversion. The plan is Gandalf's final strategic gambit, the last, most desperate application of the principle that has governed his entire career. Distract the enemy, support the friends, create the conditions for the courage of others to determine the outcome. Gandalf is not going to the Black Gate to win a battle. Gandalf is going to the Black Gate to die, or to be willing to die, to be willing to sacrifice everything, to create the window of opportunity that Frodo needs. Part 39. The Black Gate. Gandalf rides to the Morannon, the Black Gate of Mordor, the great fortified gate that guards the entrance to Sauron's realm. The army of the West rides with him, 7,000 men. The remnant of Gondor's strength and Rohan's riders, a tiny force compared to the armies that Sauron can field. A force that is marching to its probable death. The march takes 6 days. 6 days across the desolation of the Dagorlad, the ancient battlefield. The blasted heath where the last alliance fought Sauron 3,000 years ago. The army marches past the dead marshes, past the ghostly lights that mark the graves of the fallen, past the evidence of wars that have been fought before and that will be fought again. Gandalf rides at the head of the column. Gandalf has been walking the roads of Middle-earth for 2,000 years. And now, at the end of the journey, at the final stage of the mission that began when Olrin reluctantly accepted the Valar's commission, Gandalf is riding toward a gate that he knows he may never ride away from. The army reaches the Black Gate. The gate is closed. The mountains on either side of the gate are fortified, studded with towers, manned by orcs, bristling with the preparations that Sauron has made for exactly this kind of assault. Gandalf calls for Sauron's surrender. The call is not serious. Gandalf knows that Sauron will not surrender, knows that the demand is a formality, a provocation, a way to buy time and draw attention. The mouth of Sauron rides out. The lieutenant, the ambassador, the mouthpiece of the Dark Lord. The mouth of Sauron shows Gandalf the evidence that seems to prove that Frodo has been captured. Frodo's mithril coat, Sam's short sword, the grey cloak of Lothlorien. The mithril coat. The coat that Bilbo gave Frodo in Rivendell. The dwarf mail that Thorin gave Bilbo beneath the Lonely Mountain. The coat of rings that has passed from Erebor to Bag End to Rivendell to Mordor. The coat tells a story. The coat traces a line through Gandalf's 2,000-year journey, from the quest for Erebor, through the 60 years of peace, through the journey of the Fellowship, to this moment, this confrontation, this terrible display of what appears to be proof of failure. Gandalf's heart breaks. For a moment, just a moment, Gandalf believes that the quest has failed. For a moment, Gandalf believes that Frodo is captured, that the ring is taken, that everything he has spent 2,000 years building has been for nothing. The moment is devastating. The moment is the darkness that Gandalf has feared since the beginning, the darkness of total failure, of wasted effort, of a 2,000-year journey that ends in the dust before the Black Gate with nothing to show for it. But Gandalf does not surrender. Gandalf rejects the mouth of Sauron's terms. Gandalf refuses to capitulate even in the face of what appears to be total defeat. Refuses because surrender is not in Gandalf's vocabulary, because hope is not a strategy that requires evidence, because Gandalf has been doing the impossible for 2,000 years and will not stop now. Gandalf seizes the tokens, the mithril coat, the sword, the cloak, and refuses to negotiate. The message is clear. The West will fight, regardless of the cost, regardless of the odds, regardless of what has happened to the ring-bearer. The Black Gate opens. Sauron's armies pour out. The army of the West is surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, trapped on the field before the gate, with no retreat and no reinforcement. The last battle begins. Part 40. The end of the ring. The ring is destroyed, not by battle, not by strategy, not by the military action that Gandalf has orchestrated at the Black Gate. The ring is destroyed by Frodo and Gollum, on the edge of the crack of doom, in the moment of supreme crisis when Frodo's will fails and Gollum's obsession succeeds and the ring falls into the fire that forged it. Gandalf feels it. Gandalf feels the ring's destruction, feels the shockwave of Sauron's destruction ripple through the spiritual fabric of Middle-earth, feels the shadow lift, feels the weight of 2,000 years of vigilance suddenly, catastrophically, miraculously end. What does that moment feel like? What does it feel like to carry a burden for 2,000 years and then have it vanish in an instant? What does it feel like to spend your entire existence preparing for a catastrophe and then to feel the catastrophe dissolve, to feel the darkness that has haunted your every step and shaped your every decision simply cease to exist? Gandalf must feel relief. Gandalf must feel grief. Grief for the friends who did not live to see this moment. Grief for the kingdoms that fell before the ring was found. grief for the centuries of efforts that were necessary to reach this point. Gandalf must feel the terrible, emptying, almost frightening sensation of purpose suddenly fulfilled. The sensation of a being who has been walking toward a goal for 2 millennia, and who now has to face the question of what comes next. The Tower of Barad-dûr collapses. The Nazgûl shriek and die. The orcs scatter. The armies of Sauron, deprived of the will that commanded them, fall apart, crumble, break, flee in every direction, directionless and terrified. And Gandalf, standing in the dust and the chaos and the impossible, unbelievable aftermath of victory, Gandalf does not celebrate. Gandalf does not rest. Gandalf looks toward Mordor and thinks of the hobbits. Gandalf calls the eagles. Gwaihir the Windlord and 2 of his companions come at Gandalf's call, come at the call of the wizard who has called them before. At Isengard, at Zirexi'gil, at every desperate moment when the mission required wings. Gandalf rides Gwaihir into Mordor, rides into the ash and the fire and the collapsing ruins of Sauron's kingdom, and Gandalf finds Frodo and Sam. The hobbits are unconscious. The hobbits are lying on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a river of molten lava, surrounded by the destruction of Mount Doom, alive but barely. The eagles carry them out. Gandalf carries them to safety, carries the 2 hobbits who carried the ring, who carried the fate of the world, who carried the burden that no king or wizard or elf-lord could carry. The rescue is the completion of Gandalf's mission, not the military victory, not the destruction of Sauron, the rescue of the hobbits, the act of care, the act of showing up, of being there, of refusing to leave the small people behind even in the moment of the world's greatest triumph. Gandalf's 2,000-year journey has been, from beginning to end, about this, about helping, about showing up, about caring for the people who carry the burdens that the powerful cannot carry. Part 41. The Crowning. Gandalf crowns Aragorn. The coronation of Elessar, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the heir of Isildur, the king returned, takes place on the first day of May, on the Pelennor fields, before the walls of Minas Tirith. Gandalf places the winged crown of Gondor on Aragorn's head. Gandalf speaks the words of the old tongue. Gandalf performs the ceremony that restores the kingship that has been vacant for nearly 1,000 years. The crowning is the fulfillment of Gandalf's longest alliance, the alliance with the Dunedain, the alliance with the Rangers of the North, the alliance that Gandalf has nurtured for centuries. Gandalf has watched over the Dunedain since their kingdom fell. Gandalf has counselled the chieftains of the North. Gandalf has maintained the connection between the scattered Rangers and the throne of Gondor that they were born to reclaim. Aragorn is the product of this investment. Aragorn is the result of centuries of careful, patient, deliberate work. The work of keeping a bloodline alive, keeping a claim valid, keeping a tradition intact through the long centuries of exile and obscurity. Gandalf did not create Aragorn. Gandalf created the conditions that allowed Aragorn to exist, created the network, maintained the tradition, kept the flame alive until the moment when the king was needed. The crowning is also Gandalf's farewell to power. Gandalf places the crown on Aragorn's head and steps back. Gandalf does not rule. Gandalf does not take a title. Gandalf does not claim a seat on the council or a position in the government or a role in the new kingdom that is being born. Gandalf crowns the king, and then Gandalf steps aside, steps back into the background, back into the role that he has always played, the role of the helper, the counselor, the friend who strengthens but does not command. Part 42. The journey home. The war is over. The ring is destroyed. The king is crowned. And Gandalf, who has been walking for 2,000 years, who has been fighting for 2,000 years, who has been carrying the burden of the Valar's mission for 2,000 years, begins the journey home. The journey from Minas Tirith to the Shire is the last great journey of the Lord of the Rings. The long, slow, bittersweet journey that takes the company back through the places they passed on the way to the war. Back through the landscapes that have been changed by the war's end. Back through the memories of friends lost and battles fought, and a world that will never be the same. The company travels north. The company passes through Rohan, passes through Edoras, where Thodun's funeral is held, where the king who was healed by Gandalf and killed by the war is laid to rest in the barrows beside his ancestors. Gandalf stands at the funeral. Gandalf watches the riders of Rohan sing the songs of their fallen king, the king who sat on his throne like a dead man until a wizard walked through the door, the king who rose from despair and rode to his death with the courage that Gandalf's healing restored. The company passes through the Gap of Rohan, along the western edge of the Misty Mountains, through Dunland, northward toward the ancient road that connects the southern kingdoms to the Shire. The journey is slow. The journey is deliberate. The urgency that drove the company south, the urgency that propelled the quest, that pushed the Fellowship through Moria and across the Pelennor and to the Black Gate, the urgency is gone. The ring is destroyed. The war is won. There is no enemy to outrun, no deadline to meet, no crisis to manage. For the first time in years, for the first time, perhaps, in centuries, Gandalf can walk without urgency. The company stops at Isengard. The Tower of Orthanc still stands, unbreakable, Menrayan, stubbornly intact amid the ruins of Saruman's operation. Treebeard is there, tending the gardens that are already growing in the wreckage of Saruman's pits. Saruman is gone, released by Treebeard, who could not bring himself to keep the wizard caged. Gandalf accepts this with a sigh. Gandalf knows that Saruman will cause more trouble. Gandalf knows that mercy, in this case, will have consequences. The company reaches the borders of the Shire. And Gandalf stops. Gandalf leaves the company at the borders of the Shire. Gandalf does not enter the Shire with the hobbits, does not accompany them on the last stage of their journey, does not return with them to the green hills and the warm holes and the comfortable, ordinary life that the hobbits have been fighting to preserve. Gandalf trusts them. This is the final expression of Gandalf's method, the final act of the 2,000-year campaign of empowerment. Gandalf has been building the hobbits' strength for decades, has been investing in their courage, their resilience, their capacity for independent action. Gandalf steps back at the border of the Shire and lets the hobbits go home alone, because Gandalf knows they are ready, knows that they can handle whatever they find, knows that they have grown strong enough to deal with whatever the Shire throws at them. The hobbits find the Shire in chains. Saruman, diminished, broken, stripped of his power, has taken over the Shire in a petty, spiteful, pathetic act of revenge. The hobbits liberate the Shire. The hobbits, Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin. The 4 hobbits who walked into the wide world and came back hardened by war and tempered by experience, organize the Shire's resistance, rally the hobbits, drive out the ruffians, and restore the Shire to its former peace. Gandalf is not there. Gandalf does not help. Gandalf does not need to help. The hobbits are ready. The investment has paid off. Part 43. The Shire and the End of All Things. Gandalf returns to the Shire after the scouring, returns to visit, to smoke a pipe, to sit by the fire with the hobbits who saved the world. The visits are quiet. The visits are gentle. The visits are the last, warm, unhurried conversations of a friend who knows that the time for friendship is ending. There is something different about these visits. There is a tenderness to them, a quality of attention, of presence, of being fully, completely, unreservedly here, in this moment with these people, that suggests Gandalf knows these are the last visits. Gandalf has always been a transient presence, has always been the guest who arrives and leaves, the friend who shows up and then disappears for months or years at a time. Now Gandalf lingers. Now Gandalf sits a little longer by the fire, smokes a little more slowly, listens a little more carefully to the hobbit stories about the rebuilding of the Shire. The Shire is healing. Sam is planting trees, using the gift that Galadriel gave him, the box of earth from Lothlorien, the melon seed that will grow into the only melon tree east of the sea. The fields are being replanted. The holes are being repaired. The Shire is recovering from Saruman's petty tyranny with the cheerful, stubborn, invincible resilience that Gandalf recognized in hobbits 2,000 years ago and that he has been cultivating ever since. Because Gandalf is leaving. Gandalf has known for some time, has known since his return from death, perhaps even since before, that his time in Middle-earth is ending. The mission is complete. The ring is destroyed. Sauron is defeated. The Wizard Order has fulfilled its purpose, or at least Gandalf has fulfilled his portion of the purpose. The time has come for the emissary to go home. Gandalf does not announce his departure. Gandalf does not make a speech or hold a ceremony or formally declare the end of his mission. Gandalf simply tells Frodo, quietly, privately, that the time has come to go to the Grey Havens, that a ship is waiting, that the road leads west. Frodo is going too. Frodo, who carried the ring, who bore the burden that broke him, who saved the world and was broken by the saving, Frodo cannot stay. The wounds are too deep. The Morgul wound, Shelob's sting, the spiritual exhaustion of carrying a piece of Sauron's soul for months through the desolation of Mordor, the wounds will not heal in Middle-earth. Frodo must go west. Frodo must sail to the Blessed Realm, where the Valar's healing power can reach the parts of him that Middle-earth's medicine cannot touch. The parallel is perfect. Gandalf and Frodo, the two ring-bearers, the two beings who carried the greatest burdens of the war, leave together. The wizard who carried the responsibility, and the hobbit who carried the ring. The counselor and the courier, the old man who walked for 2,000 years, and the young hobbit who walked for 6 months and who changed the world. Part 44. The Grey Havens. September to 3021. Gandalf arrives at the Grey Havens Mithlond, the harbour on the Gulf of Lune, the same harbour where Gandalf first set foot in Middle-earth 2,000 years ago. The symmetry is deliberate. The journey that began at the Grey Havens ends at the Grey Havens. The road that started when an old man in a grey cloak stepped off a ship from the west finishes when an old man in a white cloak steps onto a ship bound for the west. The circle closes. The story ends where it began. Círdan is there. Círdan the shipwright who gave Gandalf Narnia 2,000 years ago. Círdan is there, building the ship, preparing the vessel, performing the ancient craft that is his purpose and his gift. Galadriel is there, bearing Nenya, the ring of water. Elrond is there, bearing Vilya, the ring of air. The three ring-bearers of the elves, the three who have sustained the elven realms through the long struggle against Sauron, are leaving Middle-earth together. Gandalf returns Narnia, the ring of fire, the ring whose power is to kindle courage and hope. Gandalf returns the ring to Círdan, completing the loan that began 2,000 years ago. The ring is no longer needed. The fire that Gandalf kindled, the fire of hope, the fire of courage, the fire of resistance against the shadow. The fire has done its work. The fire has lit fires in others, and those fires will burn on their own. The return of Narya is a quietly devastating moment. For 2,000 years, Gandalf has carried the Ring of Fire in secret, has drawn on its power to strengthen his own, to kindle the courage of others, to resist the despair that the shadow generates. The Ring of Fire has been Gandalf's hidden advantage, the tool that Credin gave him, because Credin, alone among the elves, saw what Gandalf would need for the journey ahead. Now the journey is over. Now the tool is returned. Now the fire that sustained the fires of others is set down, and the fires it kindled must burn on their own. The hobbits must find their own courage. The men must find their own hope. The world must generate its own warmth. Without the Ring of Fire, without the wizard who carried it, without the traveller who walked the roads for 2,000 years and brought the light to every dark corner he visited. Bilbo is there, old Bilbo, 131 years old, frail and forgetful and finally, blessedly free of the ring's influence. Bilbo, who started everything, who found the ring in the dark, who carried it for 60 years, who gave it to Frodo. Bilbo is sailing west, to the peace that he earned, to the rest that the ring denied him for so long. Frodo says goodbye to Sam. The farewell is the most devastating moment in The Lord of the Rings, more devastating than the battles, more devastating than the deaths, more devastating than the fall of kingdoms and the breaking of swords. Frodo says goodbye to Sam, and the goodbye is forever. Frodo is leaving Middle-earth. Sam is staying. The two hobbits who walked together through Mordor, who shared the ring's burden, who crawled together up the slopes of Mount Doom, they are being separated by an ocean and by the fundamental divide between the mortal world and the world beyond. Gandalf watches. Gandalf understands. Gandalf, who has been saying goodbye for 2,000 years, goodbye to friends who died, goodbye to peoples who faded, goodbye to kingdoms that fell, and forests that were cleared, and rivers that were dammed. Gandalf understands what it costs to say goodbye. And Gandalf gets on the ship. Part 45. The Last Shore. The ship sails. The ship carries Gandalf and Frodo and Bilbo and Galadriel and Elrond into the west, into the light, into the peace, into the blessed realm where the Valar dwell and where the wounds of the world can be healed. Gandalf's journey ends. The 2,000-year road, the endless, tireless, stubborn, magnificent journey of an old man with a staff who walked across a continent and changed the world. The journey ends with a ship and a horizon, and the slowly brightening light of a shore that Middle-earth can no longer see. What did Gandalf accomplish? What was the result of 2,000 years of walking? Gandalf did not win the war. Frodo won the war, Frodo and Sam and Gollum, on the edge of the crack of doom. Gandalf did not kill Sauron. The ring killed Sauron. Gandalf did not save Middle-earth through the exercise of his own power. Gandalf saved Middle-earth by helping other people exercise theirs. Gandalf encouraged Bilbo to leave the Shire. Gandalf encouraged Frodo to carry the ring. Gandalf healed Thodin and freed Rohan. Gandalf rallied Minas Tirith and saved Faramir. Gandalf led the diversion at the Black Gate. Gandalf called the eagles. Gandalf crowned the king. Every one of these actions is an act of support, an act of helping someone else do the thing that needs to be done. Every one of these actions is the product of a friendship, an alliance, a relationship that Gandalf cultivated over centuries of patient, humble, deeply personal work. Gandalf's power is not the power of the Maiar. Gandalf's power is the power of connection. the power that comes from showing up, from caring, from maintaining the web of relationships that enables the free peoples to act together when the crisis comes. The ring promised power through domination. Gandalf offered power through friendship. The ring promised control. Gandalf offered trust. The ring promised that one will could rule all others. Gandalf proved that many wills, freely joined, freely given, freely coordinated through the bonds of loyalty and love, many wills working together are stronger than any single will working alone. Part 46. The roads between. Let me go back. Let me fill in the gaps, the spaces between the great events, the miles between the famous scenes, the long, lonely, unremarkable stretches of road that Gandalf walked when no one was watching and no one was writing. Because Gandalf's journey is not a sequence of dramatic moments separated by blank space. Gandalf's journey is continuous, an unbroken chain of footsteps, of miles, of days spent walking through landscapes that the books mention once or not at all. Gandalf walks through the angle, the triangle of land between the Horwell and the Loudwater, where the Nadain of the North maintain their hidden camps. Gandalf walks through the Weather Hills, through the Midgewater Marshes, through the Chetwood and the Brelands, and the endless, rolling, hedge-divided fields of the Shire. Gandalf walks in rain. Gandalf walks in snow. Gandalf walks through the summer heat of southern Gondor and the winter cold of the northern mountains. Gandalf walks through the night, his staff tapping on the road, his pipe glowing in the darkness, his mind working through the problems that never stop. The problems of alliances and strategies and the slow, grinding, century-long contest with a darkness that never sleeps. The walking is the mission. This is what most fans miss about Gandalf. The walking is not the means to the mission. The walking is not the tedious travel between the important moments. The walking is the mission itself. Gandalf's mission is to be present, to be available, to be reachable, to be the person who shows up when someone needs help and who keeps showing up until the help takes hold. The walking makes this possible. The walking is the mechanism through which Gandalf maintains the vast, continent-spanning network of relationships that is his life's work. Every mile that Gandalf walks is a mile of presence. Every road that Gandalf travels is a road that connects two people, two communities, two nodes in the web. Every night that Gandalf spends on the road is a night that Gandalf could have spent in comfort, in safety, in the settled warmth of one of the great houses that would happily host the wandering wizard. Gandalf chooses the road instead. Gandalf chooses the discomfort, the danger, the loneliness. Gandalf chooses the endless, exhausting, thankless work of walking, because the walking is the point. Part 47. What the journey cost. Gandalf's journey cost him everything. 2,000 years of walking. 2,000 years of watching kingdoms fall and friends die and the world grow darker despite every effort Gandalf makes. 2,000 years of arriving too late, of leaving too early, of missing the crisis by a day or a week or a year. 2,000 years of caring for people who die because they are mortal, because the world is dangerous, because the enemy is stronger than most of them can resist. Gandalf watched the Dínadain decline. Gandalf watched the kingdom of Arnor fragment and fall, watched Arthedain collapse under the Witch King's assault, watched the last king die at the Battle of Fornost, watched the proud realm of Elendil's heirs dwindle into a scattered band of rangers wandering the wilderness. Gandalf helped. Gandalf fought at Fornost. Gandalf counselled the Dínadain. Gandalf maintained the connections that kept the rangers alive. But Gandalf could not prevent the decline. Gandalf could not stop the slow, grinding, century-long erosion of the Northern Kingdom. Gandalf watched Moria fall. Gandalf was there when the dwarves delved too deep, when the Balrog woke, when Durin the Sixth was killed, when the greatest dwarf kingdom in Middle-earth was abandoned. Gandalf could not prevent the fall. Gandalf could not save the dwarves. Gandalf could only watch and grieve and add the loss to the long list of losses that the journey has inflicted on him. Gandalf watched his own order fall. Gandalf watched Saruman's corruption, watched the slow, barely perceptible drift from wisdom to knowledge to pride to treachery. Gandalf watched Radagast's withdrawal. Gandalf watched the blue wizards vanish into the east. Of the 5 Istari sent by the Valar, only Gandalf remained faithful. Only Gandalf continued the mission. Only Gandalf maintained the discipline. Only Gandalf did the work. The loneliness of this is immense. For 2,000 years, Gandalf has been the only wizard who is actually doing his job. For 2,000 years, Gandalf has carried the weight of a mission that was designed for 5, shouldering the burden alone, walking the roads that the other 4 abandoned. The loneliness is not discussed in the books. Gandalf does not complain, does not self-pity, does not lament the failures of his colleagues. But the loneliness is there, beneath the surface, beneath the cheerful demeanor, beneath the fireworks and the pipeweed, and the irritable but warm-hearted gruffness that the hobbits love. There is a moment at the Council of Elrond that reveals this loneliness. Gandalf tells the story of his imprisonment in Orthanc, tells the assembled lords and warriors how Saruman betrayed him, how the head of his own order turned traitor, how the wizard who was supposed to be leading the fight against Sauron was trying to find the ring for himself. Gandalf tells this story calmly, matter-of-factly, without self-pity. But the story is the story of a man who went to his boss for help and discovered that his boss had been working for the enemy. Think about what that means. Think about 2,000 years of deference, 2,000 years of reporting to Saruman, of submitting to Saruman's authority, of accepting Saruman's leadership, even when Saruman's decisions seemed wrong. Think about the discovery that all of it, all the deference, all the submission, all the years of accepting Saruman's judgment over your own, was invested in a traitor. Think about the loneliness of realizing that you are the last one standing, that the order is broken, that the mission that was supposed to be shared by 5 is now carried by 1. Gandalf carries this weight. Gandalf does not break. Gandalf keeps walking. Part 48. Gandalf and the Elves. Gandalf's relationship with the Elves is one of the most sustained and most important threads of his 2,000-year journey. Gandalf visits Rivendell regularly. Elrond's house is the closest thing Gandalf has to a home. The one place in Middle-earth where Gandalf can set down his staff, sit by a fire, and have a conversation with someone who understands the full scope of what Gandalf is trying to do. Elrond is Gandalf's strategic partner, the elf lord who shares Gandalf's understanding of the Shadow's nature, who collaborates with Gandalf on the long-term plans, who provides the institutional memory and the historical perspective that the mission requires. Gandalf visits Lothlorien. Galadriel is Gandalf's deepest ally, the being who, more than any other, understands Gandalf's nature and Gandalf's purpose. Galadriel supported Gandalf's candidacy for leadership of the Istari, argued, at the council where the wizards were chosen, that Gandalf should be the head of the Order rather than Saruman. Galadriel was overruled, but Galadriel's confidence in Gandalf, her recognition that Gandalf's humility is his strength, and that his fear of Sauron is the proof of his wisdom, sustained Gandalf through the long centuries when Saruman's leadership proved increasingly inadequate. Gandalf visits Thranduil's realm in Mirkwood. The Wood Elves are Gandalf's allies in the monitoring of Dol Guldur, the forward observers who watch the fortress's activity, who report the movements of the Shadow, who provide the intelligence that Gandalf needs to track Sauron's slow return to power. These visits are not social calls. These visits are the meetings of a secret alliance, the alliance of the wise, the informal coalition of elven lords, and the one faithful wizard who are watching the shadow and preparing for the moment when the shadow will strike. The visits produce intelligence, produce strategy, produce the slow, careful, meticulous planning that will be needed when the crisis comes. But the visits also produce friendship. And friendship in Gandalf's world is not separate from strategy. Friendship is strategy. The trust that Gandalf builds with Elrond and Galadriel and Thranduil is not a byproduct of the alliance, it is the alliance. The willingness to share information, to coordinate action, to risk personal safety for the sake of a common cause. These are the products of trust, and trust is the product of friendship, and friendship is the product of showing up again and again, over centuries, over millennia. Part 49. Gandalf and the Dwarves. Gandalf's relationship with the dwarves is rockier, more complicated, and more revealing of Gandalf's character than his relationship with the elves. The dwarves do not trust easily. The dwarves are a secretive, proud, suspicious people. A people who keep their own language hidden from outsiders, who guard their craft jealously, who have been burned by too many alliances and too many betrayals to open their doors to a wandering wizard. Gandalf must work harder to earn the dwarves' trust than he works with any other people in Middle-earth. Gandalf earns the trust. Gandalf visits the dwarf kingdoms, visits Erebor after Smaug's destruction and the mountains' reclamation, visits the Iron Hills, visits the Blue Mountains where the dwarves of Durin's line maintain their exiled communities. Gandalf learns the dwarves' customs, learns their concerns, learns the specific, practical, ground-level problems that the dwarves face. The dragons, the orcs, the dwindling of the old kingdoms, the loss of Moria, the long, slow decline that has reduced the proudest craftsmen in Middle-earth to a diaspora of wandering metalworkers. Gandalf's relationship with Thorin Oakenshield is instructive. Thorin is proud, stubborn, obsessive, a dwarf prince driven by the dream of reclaiming his grandfather's kingdom from a dragon, consumed by the desire to restore his people's glory, haunted by the loss of Erebor and the treasure beneath the mountain. Gandalf manages Thorin, manages Thorin's pride, manages Thorin's stubbornness, steers Thorin toward the goal without trying to control Thorin's methods or command Thorin's loyalty. The management is not always successful. Thorin's dragon sickness, the obsessive, destructive greed that seizes Thorin after the dragon is killed and the treasure is recovered, is a failure of Gandalf's management. Gandalf is not present when the dragon sickness takes hold. Gandalf is dealing with the larger strategic picture, dealing with the approaching armies, dealing with the politics of the 5 armies, and Thorin spirals into madness in Gandalf's absence. Thorin recovers. Thorin dies in the Battle of 5 Armies, having recovered from the dragon sickness in time to lead the final charge. Thorin's deathbed reconciliation with Bilbo is one of the most emotional moments in the story, a moment that vindicates Gandalf's belief that people can be reached, that corruption can be reversed, that the real person beneath the madness is still there, still reachable, still capable of choosing the right thing. Part 50. Gandalf and Aragorn. Gandalf's relationship with Aragorn is the alliance that saves the world. Gandalf has known Aragorn since Aragorn was a child. Gandalf has watched over the line of Isildur for centuries, has maintained the connection with the Nadain chieftains, has counselled each generation, has kept alive the hope that the king will return. Gandalf's investment in Aragorn is the longest, the most patient, and the most strategically important of all Gandalf's investments. Aragorn is everything that Gandalf needs. A leader who is strong enough to unite the free peoples but humble enough to serve them. A warrior who can fight, but a man who would rather heal. A king who can command, but who earns loyalty through service, rather than demanding it through authority. Aragorn is, in many ways, the human embodiment of Gandalf's philosophy. The philosophy that says power should serve, that strength should protect, that leadership should empower rather than dominate. Gandalf and Aragorn work together for years before the War of the Ring. They hunt Gollum together. They discuss strategy. They coordinate the activities of the Rangers with the intelligence that Gandalf gathers on his travels. The partnership is quiet, unglamorous, and essential. The partnership between the wizard who sees the big picture and the ranger who works the ground. When Gandalf falls in Moria, Aragorn takes over. Aragorn leads the Fellowship through the remainder of the journey, leads them through Lothlorien, through the Argonath, through the breaking of the Fellowship at Amon Hen. Aragorn makes the decisions that Gandalf would have made, the decisions to pursue Merry and Pippin, to trust Frodo to the quest, to prioritize the visible war while the invisible war takes care of itself. Aragorn's ability to step in when Gandalf falls is not an accident. Aragorn's ability is the product of decades of preparation, decades of conversations, of strategy sessions, of the slow, patient transfer of understanding from the wizard to the ranger. Gandalf has been training Aragorn for this. Not explicitly, not with a curriculum and a lesson plan, but implicitly, through years of shared work and shared trust. Gandalf has given Aragorn the knowledge and the confidence to lead when leadership is needed. Part 51. Gandalf's Fireworks. There is a question that fans sometimes ask: why does Gandalf waste time with fireworks? The question misses the point entirely. The fireworks are not a waste of time. The fireworks are the mission. Gandalf's fireworks are famous throughout the Shire. The hobbits know Gandalf primarily as the fireworks wizard, the old man who shows up at festivals and parties and special occasions and fills the sky with rockets and fountains and dragons made of coloured fire. The hobbits do not know that Gandalf is a Maya. The hobbits do not know about Sauron or the Ring or the war. The hobbits know that Gandalf brings fireworks. The fireworks establish Gandalf's presence. The fireworks make Gandalf welcome. The fireworks create the relationship, the warm, familiar, trusted relationship between the wizard and the hobbits that allows Gandalf to show up at Bag End years later and ask a hobbit to carry the most dangerous object in the world into the most dangerous place in the world. If Gandalf did not bring fireworks, if Gandalf arrived in the Shire wearing a white robe and speaking in the high tongue of the Ainur, and announcing himself as a servant of the Valar sent to prepare the world for the return of the Dark Lord, the hobbits would not trust him. The hobbits would not open their doors. The hobbits would not share their pipes and their stories and the thousand small intimacies that make the relationship work. The fireworks are Gandalf's disguise, not his grey robes, not his old man's body, but the fireworks. The fireworks disguise Gandalf as harmless. The fireworks disguise the mission as entertainment. The fireworks make the most powerful Maya in Middle-earth look like a kindly old entertainer, and the disguise works. The disguise gets Gandalf through the front door of every hobbit hole in the Shire. This is strategic genius of the highest order. This is a 2,000-year intelligence operation disguised as a traveling magic show. This is the most effective cover identity in the history of espionage. A cover so convincing that even the person being cultivated does not know they are being cultivated. A cover so warm and so genuine that the strategic purpose and the personal affection become indistinguishable from each other. Because here is the thing about Gandalf's fireworks. Gandalf enjoys them. Gandalf genuinely enjoys making fireworks, genuinely enjoys watching the hobbits' faces light up, genuinely enjoys the laughter and the wonder and the simple, uncomplicated delight that the fireworks produce. The fireworks are strategic, and the fireworks are sincere. The mission and the joy are the same thing. The helping and the caring are the same thing. The strategy and the friendship are the same thing. This is what makes Gandalf unique. This is what separates Gandalf from every other powerful being in Middle-earth. Gandalf's strategy is his sincerity. Gandalf's mission is his nature. The 2,000-year journey is both a job and a calling, both a duty imposed by the Valar and a vocation that springs from the deepest part of Gandalf's being. Gandalf does not pretend to care about hobbits for strategic reasons. Gandalf cares about hobbits because caring about people is who Gandalf is, and the caring through some miracle of moral architecture that Tolkien himself would attribute to divine providence happens to be the strategy that saves the world. Part 52. The miles. Let me talk about distance, because the distances that Gandalf covers in his 2,000-year journey are staggering, and understanding the distances helps us understand the journey. From the Grey Havens to Rivendell, roughly 300 miles. From Rivendell to Mirkwood, roughly 200 miles. From Rivendell to the Shire, roughly 300 miles. From the Shire to Minas Tirith, roughly 1,000 miles. From Minas Tirith to the Black Gate, roughly 150 miles. Over the course of 2,000 years, Gandalf has walked each of these routes dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. Gandalf has walked from the Grey Havens to Minas Tirith and back. Gandalf has walked from the Shire to Mirkwood and back. Gandalf has walked from Rivendell to Lothlorien and back. Gandalf has crisscrossed Middle-earth so many times that the total mileage is almost incomprehensible. Tens of thousands of miles, walked on foot, at the pace of an old man, over terrain that ranges from the paved roads of Gondor to the trackless wilderness of Eriador. The walking takes time. The journey from the Shire to Rivendell takes 2 to 3 weeks on foot. The journey from Rivendell to Minas Tirith takes 2 months. The journey from Minas Tirith to the Grey Havens takes 3 months or more. Every trip that Gandalf makes, every visit to Rivendell, every conference with Galadriel, every check on the hobbits, every investigation of a rumour or a sign of the shadow costs weeks or months of travel time. Consider a single year. In a single year, Gandalf might travel from the Shire to Rivendell, 3 weeks. Then from Rivendell to Lothlorien, another 3 weeks through the mountain passes. Then from Lothlorien to Dol Guldur, days of cautious reconnaissance. Then from Dol Guldur to the Woodland Realm, a week through Mirkwood's dangerous paths. Then south through the Anduin Valley, west over the mountains. Back to Rivendell, back to the Shire. A single circuit of Gandalf's core network takes the better part of a year, and that is without detours, without emergencies, without the unexpected crises that force Gandalf to change his plans and ride in directions he had not intended. Multiply that by 2,000 years. The total distance Gandalf has walked is beyond meaningful calculation. A number that exists somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of miles, accumulated step by step, league by league, across every road and path and trackless wilderness that Middle-earth contains. Gandalf's feet have touched more ground than any other being in the history of the world. Gandalf's boots, those old, worn, road-stained boots, have carried him farther than the eagles fly. The time cost is the reason Gandalf's network is so remarkable. Gandalf maintains relationships across a continent, maintains the web of friendships and alliances that stretches from the Grey Havens to Mordor, while spending most of his time simply getting from one node in the web to another. The maintenance of the network requires Gandalf to spend more time walking than talking, more time on the road than in the council chamber, more time alone with his thoughts and his pipe than in the company of the friends he is walking to visit. Part 53. The meaning of the journey. Gandalf's journey is Tolkien's deepest statement about the nature of good. Good, in Tolkien's mythology, is not a force. Good is not a power. Good is not a weapon that can be deployed against evil or a shield that can be raised against the shadow. Good, in Tolkien's mythology, is a relationship, a web of relationships. A network of caring and trust and mutual support that holds the world together against the forces that would tear it apart. Gandalf embodies this understanding. Gandalf's entire 2,000-year career is the construction and maintenance of a web of relationships. Gandalf does not build fortresses. Gandalf does not forge weapons. Gandalf does not create institutions or establish kingdoms or develop systems. Gandalf builds friendships. And the friendships, when the crisis comes, prove stronger than any fortress, any weapon, any institution. Sauron does the opposite. Sauron builds systems. Sauron creates structures of domination, structures that compel obedience, that enforce compliance, that reduce every being in the structure to an instrument of the Dark Lord's will. Sauron's Mordor is the most perfectly organized, most efficiently managed, most brutally effective system of control in the history of Middle-earth. Sauron's system works flawlessly until the moment it doesn't. Until the moment the ring falls into the fire and the system collapses, instantly and completely. Because every component of the system was dependent on the single point of control at its center. Gandalf's web does not have a single point of control. Gandalf's web does not collapse when Gandalf falls. When Gandalf falls in Moria, the web continues. Aragorn continues. Frodo continues. The alliances that Gandalf built continue to function because the alliances are not dependent on Gandalf. Because the alliances are real relationships between real people, sustained by real trust, not puppeteered from above by a central authority. Gandalf's web is decentralized. Gandalf's web is resilient. Gandalf's web survives its creator's death because Gandalf built something that is bigger than himself. The ring is the anti-relationship. The ring isolates. The ring separates the bearer from everyone who cares about them, drives them into secrecy, into paranoia, into the terrible, consuming loneliness of a being who trusts no one and is trusted by no one. The ring is the destruction of the web, the severing of the connections, the breaking of the bonds, the dissolution of every relationship that holds the bearer to the world. Gandalf is the anti-ring. Gandalf connects. Gandalf brings people together. Gandalf creates the relationships that the ring destroys, creates the trust that the ring undermines, creates the hope that the ring extinguishes, creates the community that the ring dissolves. Gandalf's entire journey is a 2,000-year construction of the web that the ring is trying to destroy. The final confrontation is not Gandalf versus Sauron. The final confrontation is the web versus the ring, the network of relationships that Gandalf has built versus the instrument of isolation that Sauron has forged. The web wins. The web wins because the web produces the hobbits who carry the ring, the king who leads the diversion, the riders who break the siege, the eagle who carries the rescue. The web wins because every node in the web, every friendship, every alliance, every relationship contributes something that the ring cannot match and that the Dark Lord's strategy cannot anticipate. Part 54. The Last Road. Let me leave you with this. Gandalf's journey is not over. The ship that carries Gandalf west is not carrying Gandalf to retirement, is not carrying him to a celestial nursing home where old wizards go to rest. The ship is carrying Gandalf home, back to Valinor, back to the Blessed Realm, back to the place where Olrin began, where Nienna taught him pity, and Manwë taught him courage, and the music of the Ainur still echoes in the halls of the Valar. Gandalf is going home. But Gandalf is not going back to the person he was. Gandalf is bringing 2,000 years of experience with him. 2,000 years of walking, of caring, of losing friends and winning battles and watching the world change and helping the world heal. Gandalf is bringing Middle-earth with him, the memory of the Shire's green hills and Rivendell's waterfalls, and the golden roof of Edoras and the white stone of Minas Tirith. Gandalf is bringing the hobbits with him, not physically, but spiritually, in the memories and the friendships, and the irreducible, unbreakable bonds that 2,000 years of showing up have forged. Olren left Valinor as a spirit who understood compassion in the abstract, who had learned from Nienna what suffering meant, who had walked among the elves invisibly, who had planted hope in hearts without ever having to carry hope himself. Gandalf returns as a being who has carried hope through 2,000 years of failure and loss and darkness, who has carried hope not as a principle, but as a practice, not as a theory, but as a lived experience, day after day, mile after mile, through the cold and the rain, and the endless, grinding, thankless work of keeping the light alive in a darkening world. The return is not the same as the departure. The return is richer. The return carries the weight of everything that happened between the Grey Havens and the Grey Havens, between the arrival and the departure, between the first step and the last, between the young spirit who feared the task and the old wizard who completed it. The Grey Havens are grey because the light is fading, the sun is setting, the horizon is darkening. The ship sails into the twilight, into the space between the mortal world and the immortal world, between the lands that know suffering and the lands that know peace, between the world where Gandalf walked for 2,000 years and the world where Gandalf will remember those walks forever. But the horizon, as Gandalf knows, is not the end. The horizon is just the point where you can no longer see what lies beyond. Gandalf has been walking toward horizons his entire life, walking toward things he cannot see, trusting that the road leads somewhere worth going, trusting that the journey has meaning even when the destination is obscure. The last road leads west. The last road leads to the light that is breaking on the far shore, the light that Frodo sees as the ship approaches. The light that is not the setting sun, but the rising dawn of a country that the mortal world has forgotten. Gandalf has been walking for 2,000 years. And the last road, the road that leads beyond the circles of the world, beyond the reach of shadow, beyond the memory of grief, the last road is just as long as Gandalf needs it to be. The old man sets down his staff. The old man steps off the ship. The old man walks onto the shore. And somewhere in a hobbit hole in the Shire, a gardener looks up at the evening sky and remembers the fireworks. Thank you for walking this road with me tonight. Until next time.